Good evening. I'd like to call our regular council meeting on Monday, March 13th to order at 6 p.m. Hello to members of council here in the all here in the chamber this evening. On my far right, Councillor Duck, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Garnett. To my far left, Councillor Novick, Councillor O'Keefe, and Councillor Rintoul. Myself, Mayor McNeil-Smith. Good evening to members of staff here in the chamber and to those who may be participating online. We'll certainly introduce them as each are speaking. And good evening to members of the public here in the chamber and to those who may be watching the live web stream or watching a recording of our meeting at a later date. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we're holding our meeting this evening in the traditional and ancestral territory of the Saanich nations. We express our gratitude for their stewardship of these lands and waters for millennia. Turning to approval of the agenda, we have 4 items of correspondence that were received after the agenda was published. We'll be appending them to the agenda by motion and they will be considered received. I will just refer to them. They are a letter from Mr. Eric Diller that will go under 12C, recommendation 1. And we have 3 pieces of correspondence from residents on Wildflower, and they will go under the corresponding agenda item 12B, recommendation number 2. With those additions, I'd look for a motion.
Approve as amended.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. So we're now moving to section 4, which is our general public participation period, where members of the public or have an opportunity to come forward and address council for up to 4 minutes. We ask that you provide your name and municipality that you reside in and address council. So for a first time, is there anyone wishing to address council this evening? Please come forward. And staff, if we could assist with the microphone.
Except for the fact that I can't see any of you. Hang on. My name is Charlene Froom. I live in North Saanich. I've lived on the peninsula for 50 years and in North Saanich for 37. Full disclosure, I am vice chair of the SPAAC, Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee, but I am here to speak as an individual tonight. I want to talk about the active transportation plan and the parking survey. And I'm not going to rehash the numbers, the data, the surveys, and all the numbers. What I want to try to bring to you is a personal point of view. I've lived in a wheelchair for 40 years. 6 years ago, after subsequent secondary spinal injury, overuse injuries, I had to move into a van with a side ramp. There's no parking in Sidney for vans with side, there's a few now, for vans with side ramp parking, particularly in grocery stores. We started working with the municipalities when the government took the accessible parking out of the building code. Municipalities had to come up with their own code. Started working with our local communities and we were able to put parking into place. Naively, I thought that would take care of it. I didn't realize that that only meant for anything going forward. So right now, there are no grocery stores that have parking that I can use. I started out by using 2 spaces and I would put a cone down. Soon found out that didn't work because people threw the cone away or they drove over it. And at one time I had my car key. So thought this is not going to work. So I started looking for end spaces where I could maybe open up and get out on an end. That's dangerous because you've got cars coming around the corner and they're going to not only take me out but wreck my van. So that's not going to work. I started, okay, hey, I'm going to park up on the street in front of the Thai restaurant, the little Mexican restaurant. I can do that. If I angle it right, there's a spot I can go where my ramp won't catch. So I thought this works out. I can still get my groceries, come up. I don't have to go on the street very far to put them away. So then COVID hits and guess what? There's a patio put up there. Now I can't park there either. So I started parking on 5th Street. Once the lines were removed, I could angle my van in a position where my ramp would open up without hitting a tree. I could access. I wheel through the parking lots to get my groceries. I buy groceries that I can carry in my mouth back up to my car to load again, depending where I'm parking, I don't have to go out into the street too far. So then that comes, all of a sudden it's starting to get really busy. So now I'm parking on Bevan. I park in behind Save-On and I go down by where the loading dock is to get my groceries, come back up through that. Again, when it's light and nice out, I don't mind doing that, but when it's dark and rainy, I don't like coming through the parking lot like that. Anyways, then I see the active transportation plan, and the 2 places that I can park to get groceries are slated to be bike lanes. Takes away any parking. I'm kind of at my wit's end because I don't know where else I'm gonna get groceries. How do I get my groceries? And I'm not against the active transportation plan. I've spent time under a car. I know what it's like to be in a traffic accident. I wanna keep people safe. I want the kids to get to school safe. I want people to enjoy riding their bikes. But I think we really need to all work together to find a plan that works for all of us. And I think this active transportation plan is missing some of that. We can debate whether Fifth and Bevan are busy streets or not for parking. I can tell you now they are, because I no longer come into Sidney in the middle of the day anymore. I used to be at Alexander's almost every day for coffee. I don't come in anymore because I now come in after 4 o'clock, because that's when I can get a parking spot on Fifth or Bevan so I can get my groceries. And I'll tell you, I miss Sidney because it's a great little place, but I'm going other places for coffee. But I still need to get groceries. I still need to get my prescriptions. I still need to get my 85-year-old mom with dementia to the doctors on Bevan. She can't walk and she refuses any assistance because in her mind she's still better than I am. So quite honestly, I'm terrified about this, that I just don't know where else I'm gonna go. So I really hope that you guys will take another look at the active transportation plan, and if we work together, we can figure out a way that the cyclists will be happy and that I will have a place so I can buy groceries. I really hope so. And I know you guys think I sound like a broken record because I'm always talking about parking, but it is vital to my existence. Nobody wishes more than I do that I could ride a bike into Sidney, but I can't. So I'm hoping that you'll work with us and we can come up with something that everybody's happy with. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Froom, for taking the time to come to speak before council, and we appreciate your input. And as you may know, part of the process is we're waiting for the public engagement process to complete. All of the written submissions and surveys will come forward to council, and we'll be having a full discussion before we, consider approving the plan. And there'll be lots of discussion on points such as you raised this evening.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll ask for a second time. Is there anyone wishing to come forward to address council this evening? And for a third time, is there anyone wishing to come forward? Seeing none, I'll close public participation and we'll move to our first agenda item, which is under 5A, bylaws. And it's bylaw number 2247, zoning bylaw number 2247, which is an amendment 42 at 2060 White Birch Road. And it's to amend the Comprehensive Development Zone 37, also known by CD 37, by changing the method of calculating residential density, increasing maximum lot coverage, and decreasing the minimum rear setback to construct a 4-story, 63-unit apartment building and surface and underground parking spaces. And we have a recommendation that we can proceed this evening with 3 readings through 3 separate motions. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you. I'll move, sorry, your last statement there surprised me.
Sorry, we can move forward this, we can move.
Second reading.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, we can begin with second reading. 2 motions this evening.
Yeah.
Or sorry, just 1 reading this evening.
Correct, thank you. So I will move that zoning bylaw number 2015, amendment number 42, bylaw number 2247 be given second reading and that staff advertise for public hearing.
Second.
We have it moved by Councillor Rintoul, seconded by Councillor Duck. All motions on the floor. I'll turn to the mover and seconder, Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So I think we've had a fulsome discussion with respect to this project and presentation from the applicant, and certainly heard from the immediate community during the first public hearing. And this the intent behind this revision to the zoning bylaw does change one element that had been highlighted during that process. And at this point in time, I recognize that, again, we'll be going back out to public hearings, so we'll have the opportunity to hear further from residents with respect to the revision that's before us this evening. So I will support second reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Doug.
Nothing to add, thank you.
Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff, just want to see clarification. I touched base earlier last week with staff, but in terms of the original proposal, it was 63 units and I believe a cafe, so there'd be technically 64 units, and the cafe is now being pulled. So does that need to reflect that, or are we just going with 63 until they tell us otherwise?
Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, the way the bylaw amendment is written, it doesn't limit the development to 63 units, so they could divide it into 64 or fewer or greater, because it's based on a floor area ratio, not units per hectare.
So, but us reflecting 63 in here won't have any impact on anything. We don't need to worry about the semantics.
No, the way the bylaw is written, it doesn't limit them to 63 units.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I was opposed to this last time. I still am. So I know I'm not going to change anybody's mind, but I'm opposed to it because I think the developer is getting a significant benefit from this rezoning, and I don't think the community is getting enough benefit out of this toward the rezoning. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Novak.
Two things. First one, Mr. Mayor, through you to staff, I have a question. Is that all right?
Please.
Is this proposed zoning density limited to 64? What's the maximum density that could be built in that space under the new zoning proposed?
Sure. Through the mayor to Councillor Novak, the density limit in this zone, the way that's proposed to be changed, is to a floor area ratio, which limits the amount of overall floor area in the building compared to the size of the property. It doesn't specify how many units could be built in that building. And this is the way most zones, most multifamily residential zones in Sidney, as well as the downtown commercial zone, are structured. The density is limited to the amount of floor area being built rather than a specified number of units.
So in theory, it could be greater than 64 if the unit sizes were diminished or reduced.
Yes, that's true.
Mr. Mayor, I'm afraid that I will not be voting for this. I still believe that the density proposed by the developer for this space is excessive for the area. I think it's too much. We heard from the populace in the area. I'm sure we'll hear from them again at the next public hearing. But I would like to see something, if we're going to adjust the bylaws, I think we need to adjust them in such a way as to allow for reasonable density, not maximum density. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Novak. You know, when I hear a comment about we should, as a member of council, you do have the option to propose an amendment. I think you, if memory serves, you did, I believe, propose an amendment at the previous meeting with regards to density. I don't mean to put staff on the spot. I'll turn to Ms. Verhagen.
Sure, thank you. Just to clarify my previous comment, if the developer was to add more units within this building, they would need to add more parking spaces on the property, because each residential unit is required to have one parking space. And if you remember from the development permit application, they were providing the required number of parking spaces. So there would be a change to the site plan. Just a side note. Thank you.
Sorry, if I remember correctly, Councillor Novak, you actually proposed a motion that we revert back to the previous density calculation, and that motion did not go forward. So I do appreciate your remarks this evening.
Yeah.
Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? We have Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Novak opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. I'll now turn to item 5B, also under bylaws, which is our fireworks bylaw number 2251. This is amendment number 2 to that bylaw. This bylaw is amendment number 2 to add Roberts Bay environmentally sensitive area and waterfront environmentally sensitive area to the prohibition zones. I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please. Good evening, Chief Mickelson.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. In response to input from residents, Council instructed staff to bring forward a bylaw amendment to expand the prohibition zone for the discharge of fireworks to include the All Bay Seam Harbor environmentally sensitive area, and staff are recommending that bylaw 2251 be given first, second, and third readings this evening.
Thank you. I will turn to Council if there are any questions. Normally we proceed with readings, but okay, so I think I am correct this time that we can move forward with 3 separate readings.
I'll move first reading.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor? None opposed, the motion carries.
Move second reading.
Second.
Moved and second, this is the reading where we have discussion. I'll turn to the mover, the seconder.
I just, through you to staff, just highly recommend, because there's a number of areas that overlap with the District of North Saanich, that we reach out to our colleagues there, both on council and staff, to seek their support of helping mandate this in their community. So I would just recommend that as part of our ongoing actions. Thank you.
I'll turn to Mr. Humble for a moment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Councillor Duck, if that's council's wish, we should probably have a motion to that effect, and so that we can formulate it as a resolution moving forward.
So I'll leave that with you, Councillor Duck, as a possible motion arising. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. I'm thinking along the same lines as Councillor Duck, and just wondering if there was to be a motion arising, would that be tonight, or do we wait till after adoption? If we were going to make a motion to have our colleagues at North Saanich review
It would be
this.
appropriate to make that this evening after this motion, after we give readings to this.
Okay.
Bylaw.
Okay.
Councillor No?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff, I'm not certain I understand the maps that were provided. Based on what I'm looking at in the maps, we've got the Lochside ESA, we've got the Roberts Bay ESA, we've got the Resthaven Shoal Harbor Park ESA, and we have, I think, is it the Ray Creek or?
Yep. Councilor Bakery.
Yeah, I think it's the Ray Creek ESA as well. So we've got quite a number of ESAs included in this prohibition area. Is that correct?
Through the Mayor to Councilor Nova, that is correct, and all prohibition zones were included in the report for reference purposes, and as an opportunity to once again kind of publicize our discharge prohibition zones implemented in September of 2022. So we seize that opportunity to again notify the public through this this mechanism.
Thank you. And would it not be simpler just to, I mean, if you look closely at the map, there's not a lot left in the town of Sidney where you can legally discharge fireworks. And I'm just wondering, would it not be simpler and set kind of I think, an important precedent if we simply prohibited the use of fireworks within the town of Sidney altogether?
So I will take that as a question, Councillor Novick. Council has considered, both the last council and I believe it has come up as a topic with this council in consideration of doing just that. And the recommendation from staff was to proceed as we are this evening, given the direction council has provided. And you know, it could be an amendment, but I think we've actually had that come forward at a previous council meeting.
I hear you, Mayor. However, looking at the maps now, the previous map I don't think included the Lochside ESA. Perhaps I'm mistaken on that.
So if we did not, if this motion to give second reading was to not pass, then we could proceed to give direction to amend the bylaw. We have a bylaw. Council has directed staff to bring the bylaw before us that we have before us this evening. If we wish to amend that, as you may be suggesting, we would have to, second reading would not proceed, or could not proceed, and we would then have to give staff direction to return to the bylaw and make the amendment if that amendment passed at council. However, I do remind that that it did come for consideration of all of Sidney was given by council previously.
Fair enough, thank you.
So we are still at second reading. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'm looking at the map on Schedule H, and a question through you to staff. I'm looking at that little peninsula of land that juts out at the foot of Harbor Road there. Is just kind of outside the zone, and I'm thinking, you know, does it make sense? There's a few other areas along the waterfront that are just barely outside the zone, so I presume technically they could set off fireworks there. I'm wondering if staff thinks, is it worthwhile to extend that red line for the prohibition zone to cover that area, or does it make?
Again, through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, in practicality, I'm not too concerned about fireworks discharges in those little
Okay.
points of land. Really, it comes down to the instruction given to our GIS technician was 200 meters from these pre-identified environmentally sensitive areas. I think in all practicality, we'd all realize that these areas are contiguous and little juts of
Okay.
land. So I agree with you, I noticed that as well, but that was some of the subtleties of the strict interpretation of what we provided to our GIS technician.
Okay, so I guess leave it as it is, and if it ends up being an issue, yeah, okay, thanks.
Thanks for the question, Councillor O'Keefe. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question on second reading. All in favor? Opposed? When opposed, Councillor Novak. The motion does carry.
Move third reading.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. And so that will come to a future council meeting for consideration of final adoption.
Motion arising, Your Mayor, Your Honor.
Please, Councillor Duck.
I would like to make a motion that we direct staff to reach out to our colleagues, both on council and staff in District of North Saanich, to observe the areas we put restrictions on and maybe give similar consideration for the District of North Saanich and their residents to absorb those zones as well.
Second?
So are you making reference to a particular zone, such as?
Well, a number of the
Sea Harbor?
ESAs overlap into the District of North Saanich properties, and I'm just, would be worthwhile seeing if the District of North Saanich wants to at least include those, and maybe additional on their own, but at least those.
Okay, I have a thought, but I'll turn it to Chief Mickelson.
My one recommendation would be, the Shoal Harbor federal zone extends all the way up towards Tryon Road. So I think if we made, it was specific to those environmentally sensitive areas, I think that would be a good start.
Okay, does staff need, I don't think we specified area in this motion arising.
So yeah, just to specify areas, all the existing ESAs that we've approved in Sidney that have overlap into the District of North Saanich.
Sorry, Sidney goes ahead and identifies ESA within our municipal boundaries. So so our ESA doesn't overlap per se with North Saanich ESA.
Okay. So for clarity, the GIS has been extended through the various maps, overlaps into the District of North Saanich. So maybe observing those GIS zones that are defined on our ESAs.
Would it be appropriate, and I'll turn to staff, perhaps Chief Mickelson, to describe it as the Seam Harbor or the Shoal Migratory Bird Sanctuary?
That is correct. Our latest expansion into the All Bay Seam Harbor, that's the federal Shoal Harbor Bird Sanctuary, and that extends north almost and terminates basically at the ferry terminal. So that's basically we would request the inclusion of that federal zone, which again is contiguous with our Roberts Bay zone. So that's how I think it's best we would articulate it to North Saanich.
Okay, that's helpful. So you're specifying that zone.
Yes, and equally there's overlap in Kelsick Creek, Ray Creek.
Okay, we should be specifying that as well. If so, are you doing that, Councillor Dunn?
Correct.
Okay,
And Lochside as well.
okay. Sorry, we can raise hands as we're speaking, okay. Okay, does council understand the motion that is on the floor? Sorry, we have a mover, a seconder? Sorry, did you?
Yes.
Seconder? And then we clarified the motion, so the seconder is good with the clarification. I'll turn to you, Councillor Duck, for motivation.
Just that, we're creating these firework inhibit areas, and the number of areas that go into North Saanich. So right away, you can have a resident of North Saanich decides to have a bonfire and fireworks party that's in an area that is impacting our wildlife and bird life. And I'm just thinking it would be a nice gesture by the District of North Saanich to consider including these areas as prohibition areas as well, and thereby protecting our wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Councillor O'Keefe is the seconder.
No, I'm good.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none on the motion arising, all in favor? None are opposed, the motion carries. Thank you. We have no items under development permits or development variance permits this evening. We'll turn to adoption of minutes under section 7, and we have the minutes from our regular council meeting of February 20th.
Point of order.
Councillor Duncan.
Thanks. I guess this is more of a question through to staff, but whether it would need a motion or a rising, or if this is something that just can be done as housekeeping.
Sure.
That comes from the questions and the fact that Councillor Duck, noticed the issue with the North Saanich border. This is just, again, it's just the maps, and because our council had questions about it, I know the general public will have questions about it too when they look at it. Can we have the GIS technician just extend the boundary to include the All Bay Road? Like it shouldn't be hard for him to manually do it, and then also to manually clip to our municipal boundaries where we have our ESAs, just so people aren't looking at it and thinking Sidney's regulating outside.
Okay.
We don't need a
So
motion, you guys.
I'll turn to staff whether we need to consider that procedurally, so. No,
Okay.
that's helpful. Thank you, Councillor
Thank you.
Duncan. Thank you, staff. So we are turning now to section 7, our minutes, and the minutes of our regular council meeting of February 27th.
Move that the minutes be adopted.
Second.
Any errors, omissions, or discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, the motion carries, and the minutes under 7B from our special council budget meeting of March 7th.
Move the minutes be adopted.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any errors, omissions? All in favor? None are opposed, the motion carries. And Mr. Hissick, our Chief Financial Officer, has kindly provided a 2023 budget confirmation, just a summary of what we completed that evening. If there are any questions from Mr. Hissick, there was one item in the report making reference to our amendment, our budget amendment to the grants and aid. We did increase that to 20,000 from 16.5. Mr. Hissick in his report has indicated that currently 1,500 is allocated specifically, and so was it our intention to raise it from 15,000 to 20,000 or for 16.5 to 20,000. My intent when I made that motion and it was passed by council was for it to be raised from 16,500 to 20,000, but if we wanted to proceed otherwise, it would be a motion at this time. Not seeing that, if we could have a motion to receive Mr. Hissick's report for information.
Move receive for information.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hissick. We have no business not completed at a previous meeting, a rise in report. We have the mayor's report. We have the CRD board highlights from our CRD board meeting of February 8th. I have nothing in particular to highlight. The information is all provided within the report or links within the report. I'd look for a motion to receive, and if there are any questions, I would try to address them.
So
Move receipt.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. And we're now turning to council reports, and I'll first turn to Councillor Duck, who is our council liaison to the South Island Prosperity Project. Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Mayor. I've had 2 meetings with the South Island Prosperity Project, one with staff and one with the Partners Committee, which is made up of many of the municipalities. Both were very interesting. Staff brought forward a community profile on Sidney, which will be part of their launch and profiling all the different communities that are in SIP. I will say right now that their profile needs some work and some editorial help, but that may be just from their lack of information directly related to the community. So we'll work with them on that. The overall overview meeting that was provided to all the representatives of the Partners Committee was quite informative, and I would recommend to public and council colleagues together that take a look at it if you weren't part of the meeting. It's open on their YouTube channel and gives an overview of what they've been accomplished in the last few years and what their direction is for the next 3 years. They've moved from a 5-year plan to a 3-year plan just because of so much happening. So would recommend taking a look at that. They've started 2 other initiatives, COAST, which is the Center for Ocean Applied I can't remember the name, the acronym, but that is relative to technical operations on coastal businesses. And the other is the Integrated Prosperity, Indigenous Prosperity Center, which both are active now, and I know there's an executive director coming on from Coast that will be starting in a month. But there are 2 additional operations of SIP in terms of their activities. So that was a good session, but I highly recommend the YouTube video just to get an overview of what they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'd move or seek a motion to receive the verbal report.
So moved.
Second?
Moved and second. Any discussion or questions? Seeing none. Councillor Duncan.
Is by any chance the S&T Science and Technology?
Could be. Thank you.
Long acronyms are a challenge. Short ones can be too.
Actually, no, I now remember. Center for Ocean Applied Sustainable Technology.
Thank you. It's official. And with that, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. And I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul, our liaison to the Memorial Park Society.
Point of order.
Yes?
I have a second report on the CRD climate action.
Okay, you had 2 reports. Okay, please proceed.
Thank you. My apologies, Councillor Rintoul. Again, participated in the CRD climate action intermunicipal task force. We had a group meet of all the different municipalities and got an update on what the CRD is doing relative to climate action. I was also part of the Trans-Canada Climate Caucus and listening to what was being said there. But it was interesting from the CRD Climate Action, they have a number of directed actions coming forward, which is the Home Early Navigator, which are Energy Get Navigator, which helps you understand what you're using in terms of heat and uses in your home. So that's a great thing. They're a strong supporter of implementing the STEP code program within the building thing, and so that's another one. And they're also working on a heat vulnerability mapping, which is to just help identify areas and buildings that need some help with as we go into heat domes and that. I welcome my colleagues to provide any topics that they would like to see the Climate Action Task Force discuss at their next meeting. I'd happy to take those forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Motion to receive. Moved by Councillor Novick and seconded by Councillor O'Keefe. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you for those reports. And Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. On February the 28th, I attended the Memorial Park Society meeting at the Mary Winspear Center, and I'm pleased to advise that, as we're aware, the Memorial Park Society, Mary Winspear Center, have been working on getting caught up on their financial reviews for a number of fiscal years. Previously, the foundation, which is a separate entity used specifically for fundraising purposes, the Saanich Foundation, had submitted to the CRA its annual returns for 2019, 2020, and 2021. and the CRA have acknowledged receipt with the Memorial Park Society. So they're getting caught up, as we had previously been made aware on some of their housekeeping. In addition to that, the Mary Winspear Center, Memorial Park Society operating center has also been addressed through process of financial reviews. So 2020 had previously been submitted. On February the 28th, the 2021 financials were being received in camera, and so as a municipal liaison, I don't attend the in-camera meetings, so I haven't seen that. Was also advised that 2022 financial review is almost complete, and as a result of that, the MPS have scheduled their annual general meeting to take place on April the 18th. And so they are anticipating, and that would be in the evening at 7 p.m. tentatively, and they'll come out and formally confirm that with the community. But their intent is that 2022 financials would have been completed, the review process by that date, and would have been received by the Finance Committee and can be presented to the membership at that time. So with thanks to them for their hard work trying to get caught up, and as well setting a date for their annual general meeting. I would also note that there was discussion with respect to the funding agreement request that was put forward from Sidney Council, and we have that item on our agenda this evening that we'll speak to separately, but I'll also note that a funding agreement was also formalized between the Memorial Park Society and the District of North Saanich, so that they have also followed suit going down that road. At that meeting, we also heard from the center on their 2023 budget, which was discussed, and I think I'll leave the introduction of that budget to their annual general meeting once their board and finance committee are comfortable moving that forward into that proceeding. And again, with respect to their year to date, again, I would be more comfortable. Their financials and those details are reviewed following their financial review, as opposed to kind of speculating based on the insight that they've shared to date. But all in all, very comfortable with the reserves they have on hand. They are showing $470,000 in investments and cash on hand, which I think will help them, weather these short-term challenges. So I will leave my comments there.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. If we could have a motion to receive.
Motion to receive.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion or questions? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I was wondering, was there any discussion about board members coming to council to themselves to brief us on the events that took place? I remember we had members from the community came out in the fall, expressed concern about that an important community asset seemed to be at risk, and my understanding at that time was we were going to give them some time to look into what had taken place there, and that we could look forward to them coming forward to give council a briefing. I believe that they've done that for North Saanich, and wondered, can we expect the same here, or do we have to request that of them?
So if the mayor's have, I don't know what they've done with respect to presenting to
Okay.
North Saanich, so I can't comment on that. But what I would suggest is that it's probably prudent for them to complete the 2022 financial review, have that information prior to coming forward. And I will also note that the funding agreement that's before us tonight does stipulate the requirement to have the chair of the board as well as the executive director come before council to give a presentation. So I'm definitely anticipating that once they've completed what I would think is their due diligence and going through with the financial review process, that yes, I anticipate they'll be coming forward. So no date has been set, and unless staff know otherwise, there's been no discussion with that request until such time as they're caught up on their accounting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question, and taking the question, Councillor Rintoul. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None are opposed, the motion carries. Thank you. We're now going to turn to committee reports, and we have, the first is the Saanich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee. Councillor O'Keefe is our representative on that committee, and there are a number of recommendations. Councillor O'Keefe, if we normally proceed with them one at a time, but there are a couple that before we have a seconder on the motion on the floor, if we could turn to staff. So I think we can proceed with recommendation 1, but I'll ask that you first read out, that you then read out the subsequent recommendations, and I will turn to staff for some input before the motion is on the floor.
Okay. With your permission, the way I was going to proceed was to receive it for information, the minutes.
Sorry, that's the first. So
Right.
if we want to start.
And then there was a couple of things, just information from the minutes that I was going to highlight, and then move to the, specifically to the recommendations.
Certainly,
if
and
that's-
and while the motion is on the floor to receive the minutes, you're more than welcome to
Sure.
to highlight or speak to those, so please proceed.
Okay, so I'll move that the minutes be received for information.
Second.
Moved and seconded, Councillor O'Keefe?
Yeah, so just a couple things in regards from the minutes that I'll highlight. It was mentioned at the meeting that Central Saanich Police, not the RCMP, as is mentioned in the minutes, are interested in joining the committee. It's expected that that request will come to the next SPAAC meeting. The process then would be SPAAC would consider that request and then make a recommendation back to councils, because it will be up to our 3 councils to decide whether they want to amend the terms of reference to bring Central Saanich Police Department into the committee. One other thing just to highlight is the Shoal Centre will be hosting an event on Saturday, June 3rd for National Accessibility Week. This is something that the Shoal Centre has done every year for the last several years, except during COVID. So we're happy to see that come back again. And they will be consulting with SPAAC members to get ideas and feedback on what to have during that day, and more info to come as the plan evolves. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take questions. Otherwise, I'll move to the recommendations.
So we have the motion on the floor to receive the minutes for information. We've had
Right.
some, any discussion or questions? Seeing none, all in favor? The minutes are received, so if you'd like to make the first recommendation, Councillor O'Keefe.
So the committee recommended, and I so move, that the committee's draft framework and notes for discussion on the formation of an accessibility plan be referred to staff, and that they be directed to work jointly on a peninsula-wide approach to the development of each community's accessibility plan.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Do you wish to elaborate, Councillor O'Keefe?
So what we've put forward is based on, the committee actually spent a significant amount of time looking at the information available, the legislation. There's some toolkits that are available with the provincial government, and have come forward with, I guess what I would call it is sort of a bare bones kind of template. And we had some discussions with staff, and I think it is staff's intention to work with the other communities. So I imagine staff will hopefully take this into consideration, and along with it, there's some other excellent tools available. I know that we've allocated $30,000 in the budget for the creation of the plan. I don't know that we'll need all of that, but we'll leave that with staff to decide what's appropriate. And I think there's efficiencies to be gained with the 3 municipalities working together. And as I say, I believe staff are heading in that direction anyways.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further discussion?
Nothing to add.
Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you. If I could, just hear from staff that this approach that's being recommended is something that, they concur, that there's indeed efficiencies, and that it's, there's a mechanism in which for staff to work in a tri-municipal nature on this undertaking.
If I can, through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, yes, it's my understanding that The respective staff and the three municipalities are already in discussions about a proposed approach that is collaborative in nature and working together. If there is a need to hire a consultant, which I anticipate that's the direction they're looking at, all three municipalities would be essentially cost sharing the consultant, and so there'd be certainly savings there and efficiencies through that process. But it is my understanding staff are talking. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think further through to staff, if I may, that the appreciation is that while there may be that collaborative work, the plans may have some unique aspects in each of the three municipalities because of differences. But staff are still, or the staff among the municipalities are certainly looking for commonalities as well. Thank you. So we have that on the floor. No further discussion. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you.
I'll move on to the second one, taxi savers. So this was something that came up from one of the members on the committee, that apparently some taxi companies are no longer.
Sorry, can you make the motion first? And
Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay. Thank you for that. The committee recommended, and I move, that staff investigate options to require taxi companies in our jurisdictions to accept taxi saver vouchers.
So I'm gonna hold off on asking for a seconder, and I'd like to turn to Mr. Humble for some comment, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to I guess council. Well, I certainly understand and I do appreciate the intent of R2 recommendation from SPAAC. At a staff level, I don't believe that it's appropriate to look to staff or municipal staff with respect to investigating options to require taxi companies in our respective jurisdictions to accept taxi saver vouchers. I do understand that I think it's as of January 1st, the local taxi service, particular yellow cab, is no longer accepting vouchers that provide 50% subsidy towards the cost of rides for permanently registered handy dart riders. That's my understanding. But it's also my understanding that this is a provincial program that's regulated by the province. And it's also my understanding that even if it was potentially the purview of the municipality, there is something that is referred to as the Taxi Bill of Rights that was adopted or developed in 2007, and it only applies to taxi services in Metro Vancouver, not Vancouver Island. And to be clear, staff do appreciate the importance that of these vouchers and the importance that they and value that they do provide with respect to service for clients. But I just don't believe that local governments have the regulatory power to require yellow cab to accept taxi saver coupons. So based on that, I don't believe it's prudent for me to allocate critical staff resources to researching the matter any further.
And Mr. Humble, when you take a look at, the bylaws that we have, I mean, the only one bylaw that I think of is the business license bylaw. There's not a practicality or a jurisdiction to consider that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to council. Again, staff did discuss this and the possibility of utilizing the business license bylaw. Again, we don't believe that the regulatory power is there for us to be able to, again, have that as a viable option. And I think we would be challenged very quickly if we were to try to put such a condition as part of a business license for a taxi cab company.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Humble. So I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe, who's put the motion forward, but in hearing staff's additional information, I don't think we should look for a seconder on this motion, and I'm not sure if the motion just was removed, whether you are comfortable going back to the committee to provide an update to committee, or whether we should provide a motion asking staff to provide a response. Staff?
No, so just some background, how this came up is, well, as I say, it came up by a member, we had some discussion, And we put the question to the staff who were present at the meeting at the time to say, does a municipality have jurisdiction here? Is anything we can do? The staff at the meeting were unclear as to whether there was jurisdiction. And so it was on their recommendation that they said, well, if you want us to look into it, we can, but that would require a motion from your councils. So that's how it's come forward. If our staff are saying now that they've looked into it, they don't feel we have jurisdiction, I'm happy to withdraw the motion and just report on that back to the committee. I believe Central Saanich passed the motion because they got these minutes, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago. So they're doing something about it. So presumably, if they turn up something, we'll hear from that anyways, so.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Keefe. So that motion is removed from the floor.
Sure.
And if you could turn to the third recommendation, please.
So the third recommendation relates to emergency planning. The committee recommended, and I shall move, that staff review the town's emergency plans and ensure that the needs of persons with disabilities are incorporated. And in that review, staff refer to the emergency planning resources from Disability Alliance BC.
Okay, so prior to, again, we're seeking a seconder on this motion to have it on the floor, I would turn to staff for additional information.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and if I could maybe defer to Chief Mickelson first and see if he has any perspective on this.
Thank you.
Through to council, I would stress that Sidney's response plans and policies have been drafted very much recognizing our unique demographic from the outset, which is a more senior age cohort and that have more difficulty self-evacuating in emergency situations. So from the outset, our emergency response plans are tailored to that. I would also stress that looking at our emergency response guideline or binder, it comprises about 45 hazard-specific response plans and EOC task level responsibilities. So to go through each of those specifically would be a considerable task, and it's not something that we could likely undertake in this calendar year. In 2024, we're likely to undertake a comprehensive review of all of those hazard-specific response plans to update them with current best practices and to align with findings in our recently refreshed hazard, risk, and vulnerability analysis. And at that time, it would be most efficient to incorporate any changes specific to gaps we have in specific with folks with disabilities or those who can't readily self-evacuate. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you, Chief Mickelson. So a suggestion, Councillor Keefe, is that we actually refer this to strategic planning because staff if I'm hearing correctly, staff are indicating that there is a staff resource to this project. There may be a funding need, and I think we can give it consideration at strategic planning with other items that staff bring forward.
So just a bit of background how this came forward.
Sure.
So the reason SPAAC looked at this is because council asked them to. So you may recall back in November, there was a letter that came from an individual asking how we were incorporating the needs for persons with disabilities in our emergency planning. And council made a motion to refer that to SPAAC for them to look at. So council asked SPAAC to do this. What I would also note is in the recommendation, it doesn't state that there's a deadline or a time frame as to when this has to be done. So if staff have future plans to look at it, I think that's fine. I don't think it's something to refer to strategic planning. The reason is to me, this is something that absolutely has to be done, that the needs of persons with disabilities need to be incorporated into our emergency planning. So it's not like any other sort of plan in terms of active transportation, whether we're going to do a certain number of sidewalks. It has to be, it's something that I think is mandatory. So I'm happy to leave the motion as it is, and if staff, as I say, there's not a time limit on it, and they will look at it as they do their regular review. I'm happy to just leave it at that.
Okay. The reason I suggested strategic planning is not that this council may not consider this something necessary to be done, but when we're doing strategic planning and we take into account the projects that we deem urgent, it has impacts on other projects we may or may not consider at the time. So it's not, it's to provide it in that context while we're setting priorities. It's not trying to provide an opportunity to turn this down. It's that staff have indicated that this is something that they cannot proceed with this calendar year, and that they will be embarking on the plans that would be related to this in 2024. But that will still require a resource, whether it be staff, resource, and or budget. And so it's something we can better appreciate that time. So I'll turn to staff if Chief Mickelson.
Once again, to council, the Emergency Program Act requires council, municipality to update and keep current our hazard-specific emergency response plans. So this is something, again, we're targeting in 2024, and that's a legislated requirement. And of course, at that time, it would include all relevant updates, not specific to any one particular field. So at that time, and again, it is a legislated requirement, so all of those things would be incorporated at that time.
Thank you, Chief Mickelson. And another aspect, as we've seen through the report that comes back to council periodically with outstanding council action items. So when council passes a motion, there's usually an outcome to it, whereby staff can consider that has been completed. And so if we just go ahead and pass this tonight, what is the completion for that? Again, if staff, turn to Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So hearing from Chief Mickelson, maybe it's appropriate to potentially just amend the motion slightly so that it indicates something along the lines of as part of the required 2024 review. And then it's very specific, and we understand the time frame associated with this, and because when we do report back as part of sort of outstanding council action items, it's very clear in terms of what the specific time frame is for this, and as noted by the chief, we'll make sure that this is part of that required legislated review.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. Can I suggest, Councillor Keefe, if we turn to the wording?
Sure.
Number 1 says that staff review the town's emergency plans. That staff, as per the 2024 review of emergency plans, and then just continue.
Sure, if that makes sense, I'm happy
seeing a
to.
nod from Ms. Nelson. Okay. Could I turn the seconder for a?
Second?
I'll consider that a friendly amendment. Or sorry, we didn't have it on the floor.
Yes, correct.
So we are now seconding the motion and it's on the floor. Any further discussion? I'll turn to Councillor Duck and then to Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, just for clarification through you to staff, I felt that Chief Mickelson indicated that this would all be done as normal part of operations, and I don't know if passing this motion is going to accelerate or do anything different other than what he has to do under the mandated requirements. So I support the idea, but I'm not sure that we need to define it in a motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to the mover, who I think wants to respond to that, then I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Sure. So the one thing that's different is that there's a number of very specific resources related to persons with disabilities that may not currently be incorporated into our emergency plan. So there's about 10 different sort of tools and resources and best practices provided from Disability Alliance. So things about mass evacuation considerations for persons with disabilities, how to set up reception centers for persons with disabilities, the things you need to keep in mind, you know, extra items and things. So there's a whole list of things to look at that sometimes we don't, we might sort of think about, but not all of it. So it was just providing these resources so that when the chief does go through the process, he can look at that and say, okay, here, we're already doing this, this, and this, but here's something we haven't been doing it, and let's incorporate that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. I think Councillor Keefe has answered my question. I was going to ask about Disability Alliance BC and whether or not those were sort of best practices or statutory requirements through some other legislation, but I think you've addressed that, so thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And Councillor O'Keefe, the fourth recommendation.
And the last one is sort of related to this, emergency planning. So the committee recommended, and I move that staff investigate options to include locations of interest in the emergency dispatch systems to identify persons with disabilities.
Before a seconder, I'll turn to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the one, I guess, question through you to Councillor Keefe I would have is there an expectation? It's a little open-ended in terms of the motion. Is there an expectation of staff reporting back to council on this with respect to options, or reporting back to SPAAC with respect to options? And the other question I would have, maybe for the chief, is maybe what's already been done with respect to, and work on investigating locations of interest in the emergency dispatch systems to identify persons with disabilities. So I would just put that to the chief regarding existing work that's been done, if any.
So, thank you, and to council, so identifying persons that can't readily self-evacuate is the lens that we look at. And again, I think this is where we differ from some of the other emergency response organizations on the peninsula, is we're extremely aggressive in respect to being what we consider a risk reduction fire department. We do 157 inspections last year, almost 180 follow-up inspections, well over 20 public presentations, and 92 new construction fire safety plans. And all of these puts us in these buildings where the vast majority of these individuals reside, and allows us to build out specific fire safety plans that pre-identify where certain individuals reside. And of course this can have linkage back to our dispatch provider, but that information is only as good as how current it is maintained from the individuals in that building. So for many of these buildings, whether it's a strata complex, for example, we're in there at least once a year, sometimes twice a year, and we're meeting with the strata council, and we're also, it's more important that we're creating floor wardens, training, and identifying where these people are and updating the fire. And the responsibility lies with those people in the building to update their fire safety plan. So when we arrive, we have a lockbox key, we gain entry into that box, and it'll show by way of a little color-coded dot, quite often it'll be dated, that person in suite 303 cannot readily self-evacuate. So it's not entirely on the town of Sidney emergency response capacity. It's a two-way street where the effort has to be met to keep that updated. More importantly is we maintain and keep training these floor wardens, because it's more important that when I arrive there and there's smoke in the building, that someone says, everyone's out on the third floor except the individual in 305. They've taken refuge in the north stairwell. That's what we train to, and that provides the greatest level of safety. It would be nice to think that we could maintain a a database and keep it current, that our dispatcher would say, you're responding to the Shoal Center, and it would probably pop up with 50% of the addresses or the building, people in there that can't readily self-evacuate. Well, we have specific plans for that. That's almost impossible to maintain and keep that inventory current. So that's why we work with the individuals, keeping our fire safety plan current for those individual buildings, and working with floor wardens and keeping those relationships, and that's our best opportunity to kind of get ahead of that. So.
Thank you, Chief Mickelson. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. So just a little background on how this arose. So this came up when the chief was good enough to come to SPAAC and give a briefing about emergency management, and that's when the idea of, when he mentioned the locations of interest. And while it's great that, as the chief says, there's plans in place in strata buildings and condos that they have people there to deal with these things, there was concern amongst committee members who live independent lives about their places, or persons who are living outside of those environments, and being able to identify their location as a place of interest, so that if there was a fire or emergency, that the responders would know there's somebody there who's blind or in a wheelchair. And so with our discussions with the chief, what came out of that is that they could possibly look into whether there was a way to load that information where an individual could provide the information. I'm not sure how that would work, to the department to input that into the dispatch system. And I got the impression that that was something that was doable, but it would require a bit of looking into. And so hence that's how this came about. Didn't put a time frame on it, just because it wasn't seen as a real urgent thing, something that I guess we would like to hear back from staff in terms of whether it's feasible or not.
Well, yeah, point of clarification, and that is, I think I understood the chief to say that when they're working with these residences, multi-unit or not, that there's identification of whether residents are able to self-evacuate or not. I don't know if the particular circumstances of each individual why they can or can't self-evacuate, but the fact that they can't self-evacuate is noted when they arrive, at the location. I'll turn to Mr. Chief Mickelson.
Thank you. And through the council, I believe Councillor Keith is more referring to individuals who reside in single-family dwellings or away. And going a little bit back to when...
Sorry, your mic.
Apologies. So going back to Councillor O'Keefe, I believe is again referring to single-family dwellings, and in those circumstances, an individual is calling 911 and they say, we have a fire, I have smoke, or what have you. Part of the call taker's algorithm is to state, can you evacuate, can you leave the home? If not, they'll understand what limitations they are and actually try to instruct that person to a safe area, whether it's, for example, take refuge in a bathroom and close the door and put towels under. And now we're getting to the point where that information will actually populate on our mobile data terminal. So I'll be driving to the call, and as this information is going on the dispatcher screen in Surrey, it'll be populating on my tablet in my car. So I'll have that information as soon as that comes in. So that is probably, in those circumstances where there's a direct link to the individual, to the dispatcher, we'll get that information in almost real time.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I think between the last couple of comments and Chief Mickelson's last answer mostly answered my question. I was understanding that when I read this that it would probably be talking about people who lived independently in the community. And I'm just wondering, since so much of what they do with those who are in multifamily buildings is working with them to self-identify that they have these issues, in these buildings. Is there like a standard, a best practice for some sort of signage or indicator that a person can put on their house that alerts emergency personnel. I understand there'd probably be possibly security issues with alerting people that way. But I'm thinking, there are stickers, that were like, to the fire department, there are 2 cats and 1 dog in this building, that if there was some sort of universal symbol that alerted people that somebody in that building would have trouble self-evacuating, though I understand that would also probably be visible to people casing the joint. So it's a bit of a toss-up.
Chief Mickelson.
Through the mayor to Councillor Duncan, you are correct. I believe that poses a bit of a safety concern as well for the individual, stating that, potentially they can't self-evacuate. Again, when the dispatcher takes the information, that'll be passed on, or for example, if the individual has something set up with Lifeline or Life Alert or whatever their individual alarm company is, if it's a fire alarm, they can put information from that provider that'll get pushed through to our dispatch center saying they can't readily self-evacuate, or they have issues. They have to use a chairlift, for example, to come from the 2nd floor to the 1st floor. That information will get pushed on to us. But again, that's private information that they control, and it's their choice whether it gets pushed on to us through their provider.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan, and to staff. So I'll turn back to the mover. We don't have a seconder yet. If staff's description is, again, there's not an outcome to this motion as currently worded.
So I guess I'll just, through you, go back to the chief again. I'm getting the sense that you think that through the dispatch system that there's provision made when the person is contacted, that the dispatcher would ask them, are you able to self-evacuate? And if that's the case, is your opinion that there's not really much value in pursuing this further in terms of these sorts of options?
Through the mayor to Councillor Keefe, I would agree, yes. I think all of our efforts are best focused on prevention and further education. And again, I do have great faith that the dispatchers follow an algorithm they cannot deviate from, so those questions will be asked 100% of the time, and there's safeguards in place that does happen. And in 2025, the next gen 911 system comes into place, and that will include a whole raft of new technologies that will also assist persons with disabilities, whether it's text or video, and all these other different types of media platforms will be enabled. Texting will be probably more popular for a way to contact 911 in 20 years than phone will. Now it's about 80% cellular, and they figure in 20 years with this, people my daughter's age, they'll be texting 911, they'll be calling. So all of those things will be putting in place already. So I think there'll be more and more opportunities to contact 911 and have a seamless transfer of information.
Okay, well, I'm fine to report, I can report that back then to the committee based on that.
Thank you, Councillor Keefe. So you'll remove
Sure.
remove that motion. Thank you, and thank you to the chief for the detailed explanations. So that completes the recommendations that came from the committee. There was additional information that was forwarded from the staff person that does a resource to the committee, and that was the feedback on active transportation plan that came from committee members, along with 2 individual letters, and staff are making a recommendation. Terry?
Sure.
Councillor Keefe?
I'll make the recommendation that the SPAAC feedback on active transportation plan and the 2 letters be referred to staff to include as part of the feedback for the active transportation plan.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Sorry,
No, go ahead.
Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to comment, just thank the members of SPAAC, and we have one in the audience tonight. This is how it's supposed to work, and this is, it was, for me, it was a great piece of information to have, and one of the reasons why I supported the recommendation to send it to SPAAC, to get the feedback on areas I can't possibly even comprehend as an able-bodied person. So to get that perspective, even into minute detail, is really critical for me and my thinking in terms of how I make decisions going forward with the plan and then encapsulating everybody in the community. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I wanted to just second Councillor Garnett's comment. It was really good feedback. And I think, I'm sure as many people here, we see letters to the editor and probably get personal emails, especially if you're a regular cyclist. People will send you personal emails about the active transportation plan. They think it's my own personal agenda. But that this is exactly how it was supposed to happen, that when we have our consultant design something, because we must, every municipality must, of course, have an active transportation plan now, and as part of our official community plan requirements, that we will do this thing. North Saanich and Central Saanich have already approved theirs. That we will look at, if we put in bike lanes as part of that, and of course pedestrian infrastructure was part of that as well, what would be possible, what would it look like, what would the cost be, and we have to scope that out before we can take it to the community with what looked feasible. And then the community comes back, and if there's things that the consultant didn't know and council couldn't know, that they bring up those issues, and then it gets modified. And so I think I want people to get the impression that we were narrowly saved from making decisions that would have impacted people at this point, that this is the point where that information comes forward, and then the draft plan gets modified based on that, exactly like this, as this goes. And one of the things I really liked about this feedback, as well as looking at it as the impacts that would happen to people with disabilities who currently use pedestrian infrastructure and would be interacting with both the new pedestrian infrastructure, potential bike lane infrastructure, and those who currently use cars, was that they talked about that they really wanted to be involved in the design of the bike lanes to make sure that it really did meet the all ages and abilities or criteria as well. Because that's something that gets lost, I think, that is kind of talked about. It's pitted as though this is going to be infrastructure put in specifically for young able-bodied people, designed to exclude everyone else in Sidney right now. And that's not what it is. And that SPAAC kind of came in right from the gate to say, like, we know that's not what it's supposed to be, and we want to help you make sure that it goes forward properly, because a lot of the cyclists in Sidney are retired people and probably do want to continue cycling as they age. I know my dad is one of those retired cyclist people, and he plays pickleball. Don't worry, he doesn't live in town. I know one of our fiercest cycling advocates was in fact a man who had partial paralysis, and he had a modified cycle. And I know he lived in Central Saanich and went to them quite a bit about safety for cyclists. And when I ran a bicycle rental shop, I got quite a few inquiries from people who wanted to know if I had modified cycles. For people who'd suffered strokes, could no longer drive, were not legally able to, but wanted to know if I had something that would allow them to have that wheel mobility, a tricycle, something like that. And so I think looking at this as an opportunity to get people who might currently have mobility limitations that preclude them from driving, or who would like to be able to expand what they can do, to see if we can give them some wheeled transportation back that's safe and accessible as well. That this is really supposed to be an opportunity to expand options for everyone, and having SPAAC on board to help us do that, I really look forward to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Councillor O'Keefe, did you?
No, I think everybody's covered the main points, yeah. I guess I'll just say, yeah, thank you to SPAAC, and just comment that, thank you to SPAAC. They spent a significant amount of time on this, and wanted to make sure that it was good and it was specific and would help the process. So I applaud them for the time that they put into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. And seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. I'm now going to turn to Councillor Rintoul, who is chair of our committee of the whole meeting on February 21st.
Move receipt of the minutes.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Councillor Rintoul, just before you proceed with recommendation 1, I do have a potential conflict of interest, non-pecuniary conflict of interest. The proponent of this development application lives directly across the street from my residence.
We'll just give the mayor a moment to exit. Committee of the Whole recommends, and I so move, that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters, 246 feet of 10273 Cleveland Road be notified regarding development variance permit application number DV 100331 to vary the required minimum front and exterior side setbacks, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council at the time for consideration of approval of the variance.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried. Could you retrieve the mayor? Thank you, Mr. Hessick. We'll just pause until the return of the mayor. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll turn to you for comment on the second recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. So the second recommendation in these minutes was regarding development variance permit application number DV 100332 at 1018 Wildflower Place and 2516 Amherst Avenue to reduce the front and rear setbacks and to reduce the setback for a rooftop access structure in order to allow the construction of 2 new dwellings. And so council did make a recommendation at that meeting. Subsequent to council's recommendation, the proponent has revised the application, and so we won't be putting that motion forward. We will be considering, this evening, we'll be considering the revised application anew. And so I would begin by, so this is, as it indicates on the agenda, is the revision to DV 100332 at 10181 Wildflower Place and the Amherst address. And we have a report from staff, and I would turn to staff for an introduction, please. Good evening, Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. As you indicated, the applicant has revised the variance proposal for this development on the single-family home to be built at 10181 Wildflower. That's the lot on the corner of Wildflower and Amherst. They've removed the request for a variance to the setback of the rooftop access structure. They've redesigned it to remove the access structure completely. I do note that the zoning bylaw does allow rooftop access structures, so it may reappear in the future in a location that conforms with the zoning bylaw. They've also reduced the width of the building to be built on lot 2, that's 10181 Wildflower, the waterfront property closer to the ocean. They've tightened in the house a little bit from the north and from the south, so reducing the scale of the variance that has been requested. So what they are looking for now is still a variance to reduce the front setback for 10181 Wildflower, and also to reduce the front and rear setbacks for 2516 Amherst. It's the waterfront lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. I'll turn to, before we move the recommendation, I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions for staff. Councillor Garnett, and then Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff, if I may, with reference to the rooftop patio, so the original design was not at the maximum, as I recall, of 8 meters, sorry. And now the revised one is. So just so I understand, even at 8 meters, if this sometime in the future somebody wanted to put in a rooftop patio with an elevator, they could without need of a variance?
Yes, through the mayor, that's correct. The zoning bylaw does allow a projection above the height of the roof for rooftop access structures.
Okay. And one other, if I may, Mayor, through you to staff. When this, before the property was subdivided, so in its initial pristine state with the house no longer on it, would there have been, as I understand our OCP and our zoning, they could have been duplexed at that point in time, but not subsequent to subdividing? I just want clarification, please.
Sure, through the mayor again. The property is zoned R1.1, that's a single-family residential zone. It does not allow duplexes.
Okay.
So it could have allowed a single-family house on the property with a secondary suite,
Right.
but not a two-family.
Great, thank you, thank you, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Duck, and then myself.
Through you to staff, Mr. Mayor. Just a clarification, the setback on the 10181 Wildflower is actually the setback from Amherst Avenue. I think we had that discussion in the previous meeting. Just to be clear, I just want to make sure we're understanding the setback is the front setback. It's actually the southern side of that property, verging on Amherst, correct?
Again, through the mayor, yes, that's correct. It's the setback from the south lot line.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. My question through to staff is following one of Councillor Garnett's questions, and that is appreciating what the proponent is entitled to do in the future with regards to rooftop access. Could council, given the proponent has indicated that they no longer wish to include that rooftop access at this time, introduce a covenant to that effect?
To the mayor, in my opinion, that would not be suitable because the zoning bylaw allows rooftop access for any single family home or any building, and it has provisions for how that can be done in a consistent manner across the town. So.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, we do have a recommendation. Councillor Rintoul?
I'll move the recommendation that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters, 246 feet of 10181 Wildflower Place and 2516 Amherst Avenue be notified regarding development permit application number DV100332 to vary the minimum requirements for the front yard setback on 10181 Wildflower Place and the front yard setback and rear yard setback on 2516 Amherst Avenue in order to allow for the construction of a single-family dwelling on each lot, and that any written correspondence be received be forwarded to council at the time of consideration and approval of the variance.
Second.
Councillor Rintoul?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. We do have some letters this evening and some members from the local community in attendance, and you know, from my perspective, this is the process to notify the balance of the neighborhood by written notification that that council has received this application and provide them the opportunity to comment as well. So in my mind, this is the next step of the process, and I'm comfortable supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. I'll turn to the seconder.
No, nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I won't support the motion. I know it's the process, but if I don't think that we're going to hear anything different from the community. We got a couple letters tonight. When I look at the changes that the developer has made, they look to me minor in nature. The developer was the one that designed the size of these lots. They went through the process to decide how they wanted those lots configured. They knew what the parameters were for the setbacks, so it doesn't make sense to me that we would now allow a variance. The setbacks are in place for a reason. We do allow variances in unusual circumstances. We've got one tonight where there's an unusual lot that's a panhandle lot, and so we might look at something there. But from what I understand from this is that really the only reason they want the variance is to be able to build a bigger house, and that people who are rich enough to buy waterfront property somehow deserve to have a larger house. And so the developer wants to maximize the footprint of the house. And for me, that's not a good enough reason to bend the rules and allow a variance just for that reason. So I don't anticipate we'll hear anything different from the community. So for me, I just don't see any point in going forward. Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe, I would just like to turn to staff regarding a point you made and seeking clarification if it's available to us. And that is, I believe you indicated that the developer was the one who subdivided the property. I'm not sure we received that information previously.
Through the mayor, yes, it is the same applicant for the subdivision and for this variance application. I would like to provide clarification though on the size of the dwelling. For both of them, both Lot A and Lot B, 10181 Wildflower and 2516 Amherst, there is buildable space that they're choosing not to push the house into. They've repositioned the buildable footprint, like where they could put a building on the property, instead of filling out the allowable building envelope. They've pulled it significantly far back from the waterfront, on the waterfront lot, to try, as they've indicated in their letter attached to the staff report, to try to align with the buildings to the north, which is why they've pulled it quite a distance back from the waterfront and expanded it just slightly north and south. And the same on Lot A, the corner lot, they've tried to pull it in from the east lot line and just push it out slightly towards the south. So they have not covered the full area of the property that they could cover. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. Councillor Garner?
Thank you, Mayor. And I appreciate the fact that the proponent did listen to comments from the community and council and did make some adjustments. But similar to Councillor O'Keefe, other than the rooftop patio, the actual squeezing in is pretty minimal. There's still a fairly big ask there from my take. And the way I kind of look at this is that I'm assuming as a developer, when you purchase a property for developing, that one would know the zoning rules around the property and know which constructs you have to work within. It's not like the house was torn down, like, oh, we can't do that, what we wanted to do. You had to have known that going in. So knowing that, I believe that the houses are situated on these lots purposefully, and I can't blame them to enhance the view of the ocean. And that's, to me, why they're done the way they're done. If I was doing it, that's what I would have done as well. But within the construct of my position sitting here on council, I have a problem allowing variances that essentially will maximize investment on return of investment by altering what is allowed. And that essentially is how I see this. Council granting variances permits that opportunity to happen, as opposed to, and yes, maybe it will become something that we don't like later further down the line if they were building within the parameters that are allowed, but that's what they're allowed to do. And I think as a council, we shouldn't alter those parameters just basically to allow this to be a nicer opportunity for homes to look better over the ocean. And so I won't support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Before going to Councillor Duncan, I'll turn to Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I had previously asked Ms. Verhagen for a memo regarding, variances as the legislation speaks to variances specifically. So if I may, Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to read an excerpt of the memo that was provided. So the development variance process is set out in section 498 and 499 of the Local Government Act for BC. The legislation includes the notification procedure to follow for notifying surrounding property owners about an application and requested variances. Property owners are permitted to request variances or relaxations to the regulations in certain bylaws. The zoning bylaw, subdivision bylaw, parking bylaw, and sign bylaw are a few of the bylaws that can be relaxed through the variance process. The Local Government Act includes legislation on how to relax the bylaw requirement because the legislation recognizes that these bylaws must set out specific regulations and are by nature one size fits all, which does not fit or work in every situation. It is not possible to have a zoning bylaw that can be suitably applied to every scenario. Properties and buildings come in many shapes, sizes, terrains, locations, and contexts within a municipality. Applying a fixed bylaw requirement to all with no potential for flexibility would unfairly penalize owners whose property does fit a standard layout or other circumstance. So I just wanted to provide that for council's background. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. And I want to turn for clarification, either through Councillor Garnett or through staff. Councillor Garnett made reference to, in providing this variance, the proponent is able to, I'm not sure if the term was maximize or increase the value of that. I believe we've already heard from staff that the proponent is actually not maximizing the building footprint on the property. Ms. Reagan?
Yes, that's true. They're not maximizing the footprint on the property.
Okay, Councillor Gunn?
Just to clarify, maximize return on investment, not maximize the building footprint.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan?
Thank you. I will support this motion. because it's part of the process and not because I think we're going to hear anything that we haven't already heard, because people actually found this proposal before usually the public ever notices, so we've already heard from people. I support it because I don't have a problem with these variances as they stand. This proponent has done everything according to what is legal on this property, and we have not heard any comments back that are telling us that there is something that's going to be an undue hardship or something that the staff or council would be able to take into account that we would not have simply from looking at these plans and reviewing these and reviewing them and hearing the presentation from the developer and being able to speak to them, which is what the public feedback is usually to hear. I think right now when we have public hearings and then we hear from the public again and we get follow-up emails saying people are very disappointed because people came and they didn't like a proposal and we did it anyway, that the purpose of a public hearing is for the public to give a vote, right? Yay or nay, and yay or nay gets it. But that's not what the point of the public hearing is. The point of the public hearing is for the public to bring forward information that we might not have that might affect the decision on its own merits. And whether or not people like it, I have to evaluate why they don't like it and whether it's related to the variance in the application, whether it's related to the application itself, and whether they're doing something that's pushing the limit. And this application doesn't meet any of the criteria of somebody who's, trying to push the limit. As staff has said, they're not maximizing the footprint. They subdivided this property, or the previous owner who sold it and made, I'm sure, quite a bit of bank to sell this property and subdivide it, right? And the developer is getting flack for that. Did according to what is legal here. And the previous house that was on this property does not conform to the setbacks that are on the new zoning that went in with the new OCP, as I'm sure do probably none of the other houses in this area. So another thing I have to look at is by asking for a variance, are they asking for a building that's going to be utterly out of scale with the surrounding houses in the area? Or, in the case of a rebuild like this, or a new build on a place that had a building on it before, is it out of completely, out of scale with what had been there before and what the rest of the neighborhood has? And the answer again is no. That the rear setback variance, for example, goes to exactly where the previous building was. It doesn't go further into that rear yard. It goes to exactly where the building that was there before was. And so, to my mind, this is kind of looking at it in terms of a bit of an intergenerational fairness, where we have a new developer building, a new building, which of course, because everyone's property prices went up, they will sell for extraordinary amounts of money. But what they have done is move the building further back from the publicly used ecological area. They've actually provided a community benefit. And they've shown a lot of good faith in the way they design these buildings by saying that they had done them in such a way as to move the bulk of the buildings towards the street where there was no neighbors. And as soon as they heard the feedback that people were upset about the rooftop access and that it would, have people being able to look down into their yard, they immediately removed it and came back. And so that, again, speaks to me that these are not people who are trying to get away with something. These are people who are simply trying to build a building that they're still going to, get a return on investment for, which is their right, as it was the right of every person in that neighborhood who will probably sell their house if they sell it, if they bought it 20 years ago and they sell it now. It will be their legal right to make a lot of money off of it. And I think to look at this as being able to stop a development because it's the developer making money versus the private homeowners who will be there or something like that is actually to try and penalize these people because they are building high-value waterfront homes. And to allow a neighborhood to say no simply because it already is a high-value neighborhood, rather than to look at it as whether the impacts of these variances in this development really are making an outsized impact. And so for those reasons, I'm comfortable with sending this forward, knowing that the feedback will still probably be negative. And unless I hear new information about genuine impacts from these variances, I, again, don't see any reason why we wouldn't continue on with the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
Thank you. I will be supporting this going forward. I think it is part of the process, and as has been noted by my colleagues, the proponent did respond to previous comments, and I would like to hear from the public again relative to these adjustments and see what comments if they have and if we're on target. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor Novick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I mentioned in the last hearing that I wasn't crazy about this project. I'm still not crazy about the project. However, I will vote for it for the following reasons. I don't think it's the fault of the developer that the laws allowed that particular plot of land to be subdivided. And the developer only did what was permitted by law and what made sense for him as a developer. He is a developer. It's his job to develop property in keeping with with the values of the town. If you look at the setbacks the way they are, and if you tried to build within those setbacks, you'd have a very odd-shaped building. You'd probably have a very uncomfortable building. You'd probably have a very environmentally unfriendly building in terms of its heating and cooling capabilities. And I'm not sure that the look of that building would enhance the neighborhood. So I think the developers have done the best they could do with that particular layout. I'm not crazy about them having subdivided it in a 2-to-1 type of ratio. However, as Councillor Duncan mentioned, they probably are nonetheless doing the community a service by keeping that waterfront home further back from the beach area and from the environmentally sensitive area, and hopefully doing what they can to reduce erosion and the sort of things that typically happen on waterfront properties. So for all those reasons, I would have to see that this project go through. I don't see a better solution out there. I don't see them building without the variances is a better solution. And the property is already subdivided. We don't really have much of a choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. I'll support this motion as part of the process to hopefully garner a feedback from further neighboring residents. I appreciate the feedback that's we received this evening. I particularly noted that two of the corresponders indicated that they were willing to have a house that might be higher or of different mass if the setbacks were followed, and we did have some discussion of that at the last meeting. So I certainly note that. I have a question of process for staff, and that is, given we've received these three pieces of correspondence on this application this evening, and we're essentially considering whether or not to go to notice for the neighborhood. Can these pieces of correspondence be referred to come back at the time it next comes to council?
Yeah, council can certainly do that, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I mean, it's not unique that we do get correspondence in advance of the time when a final decision is made on a particular project. Typically, those involve rezonings and public hearings, however, but if that's council's direction, we can bring the correspondence forward following the notice period when council is giving final deliberations on the proposed variances.
Thank you. So again, in speaking in support of the process, we have seen in the past that when neighboring residents express concerns and staff, and council either refers it back to the proponent to make changes, or in this case, the proponent has listened to some degree and made changes, that some residents, after the formal notice period, express satisfaction with the changes that have been made. I appreciate that the correspondence we've received tonight is not such, but I think it's worthy of council to have that notice go to residents in the event that some neighbors may express satisfaction with the changes that have been made by the proponents. So I'm trying to keep an open mind on this, and would certainly deliberate further upon hearing more from the entire neighborhood. Do we have any second-time speakers? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Garnett, Councillor Kiefer opposed. The motion carries. Thank you.
And perhaps as a motion rising, if I understood from staff that it may well be required, I would move that written correspondence received this evening be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of the approval of the variance.
Second.
That's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. All in favor? The motion carries. Thank you.
Point of order.
Yes?
Mr. Mayor, can we consider recess, please?
Yes, we'll recess for 5 minutes until 8:55. 8:50. Thank you. We'll reconvene now. Thank you, council, and staff. And so we're on item 12C, which is, I'll turn to Councillor Duck, who was chair of the committee of the whole meeting on March the 6th.
And I'd like to move the recommendation that the minutes of the meeting of the Committee of the Whole meeting, March 6, 2023, be received.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, motion carries.
And arising from those minutes are a number of recommendations. And I will begin with R1, 2022 Downtown Parking Study. The recommendation that staff, and I so move that staff proceed with the operational recommendations identified in the 2022 Downtown Parking Study as follows. Action 1B, implement consistent time restrictions. Action 1D, increase targeted enforcement on high parking duration blocks. Action 1E, consolidate passenger pickup and drop-off zone. Action 2A, retain the 3-hour restriction in off-street lots. And Action 2D, enhance parking wayfinding. This is with the exception or exclusion of Action 1A, remove markings for delineated stalls. Action 1C, implement 1-hour parking restrictions on busier blocks. Action 1F, adopt on-street accessible parking design standards. And Action 1G, increase supply of commercial loading and accessible parking stalls.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Seconder, thanks for reading that in. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? No, none are opposed. The motion carries. Please proceed, Councillor Duck.
I'll move to the second recommendation that, and I so move. Action 1F, adopt on-street accessible parking design standards. Action 1G, increase supply of commercial loading and accessible parking stalls. Proceed to staff for implementation and that staff take them directly to the Saanich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee for comment and recommendation.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, so I'm in favor of that. Just a note to staff that I believe the next SPAAC meeting is on March 24th, and they're only every 2 months, so if they want just for their information to factor that into their timing.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? None are opposed. The motion carries.
And I'll move to recommendation 3, and I so move that the significant recommendations, Action 1H, pilot paid parking on Beacon Avenue. Action 1I, adopt parking technology to facilitate paid parking. Action 1K, explore a residential parking permit program. Action 2B, allow long-term overnight parking in downtown employee and public parking lot, as well as operational recommendations. Action 1A, remove markings for delineated stalls. Action 1C, implement 1-hour parking restrictions on busier blocks from the 2022 downtown parking study be brought back to a future committee of the whole meeting for further discussion.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. Council, I do have a motion arising from that meeting that we had. I would like to read the motion, and if there's a seconder, I would motivate at that time. And I'll note, while there's 5 parts to this motion, they could be separated if council wanted to do so at the time. And the motion is that staff be directed to provide an amendment or addendum to the parking study showing A, the number of on-street public parking spaces in the downtown commercial area, B, the number of off-street public parking spaces in town, parking lots in the downtown commercial area, excluding the Mary Winspear Center employee parking lot, C, and the number of off-street parking spaces in the town-operated Mary Winspear Center employee parking lot, D, a parking utilization graph for A and B combined and excluding C, and E, the impacts on parking utilization for A and B if the proposed active transportation plan's cycling corridors in the downtown were implemented with the anticipated loss of parking spaces.
Second.
So my reason for bringing this forward is I asked questions pertaining to all of this at the last meeting, and my starting point with regards to these items was that the parking study indicated that it had a total of, I believe, 1,087 parking spaces. But it did not delineate, while it did delineate the number of parking spaces in the Mary Winspear lot, and we know the number of spaces in the town parking lot. It did not delineate between the number of commercial parking, off-street commercial parking, on-street parking spaces. And I don't think, it created, there was this particular slide with the utilization that said 1,087 spaces, and it gave the impression to me, and I believe it could give it to others, that that's how many parking spaces we have downtown, when a fair number of those spaces are in either the residential or areas north or south of the commercial areas. So that's the rationale, appreciating that some of that information may be available, but some is not, and that if it was provided together, it would provide better context. And point D, in terms of a parking utilization graph for A and B combined, so that would be the number of on-street public parking spaces in the downtown and the number of off-street and parking lots, excluding the Mary Winspear Centre. We know the Mary Winspear Centre is predominantly an employee parking lot, and that I think it would be helpful to see the utilization in the commercial spaces, other commercial spaces provided. And I asked the question, and the representative from the consultant indicated that could be provided. And Part E was a separate question. I think there was some discussion, but there was no motion. There was the staff report did speak to this and suggested that we might wait until the feedback from the community input from the active transportation plan comes forward to council. And we could make a decision at that time. But I think this information will actually be helpful to council when we're giving consideration to those cycling routes and others in the ATP plan. So we have it moved and seconded. I'll turn to further discussion. Councillor Duck.
Yes, I'm going to support this motion. I think the information that we provided through this will be valuable and help us in the ATP and certainly with the downtown parking study, just to clarify that information that seems to be floating out there, just as to where parking's going to be impacted, and just give some clarity to that. And I would appreciate knowing this moving into our discussions around the ATP and the downtown parking study. Thank you.
Thank you. And I did want to turn to staff, and I'm sorry I meant to do that before going to other questions. There could be some. We did hear from the consultant and from staff what the scope of the project was, and that there might be some additional cost to this, and I'm just wondering if staff could comment on that, and whether we might need another motion or...
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I was going to ask the question about, maybe pose that to Ms. Clary in terms of a perspective on scope and costs associated with item E, and then maybe once we have that, get an understanding from Mr. Hisik on how that, where that may be funded from.
Thank you. Good evening, Ms. Clary.
Good evening. Yes, so the consultant has indicated it would, a budget estimate of about $10,000 would be reasonable to do a detailed analysis of the active transportation corridors.
Thank you. And if I could turn to staff, perhaps Mr. Hisik, where that might, what potential sources there are.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The original parking study was funded from the off-street parking reserve, which I was never entirely comfortable with, but in for a penny, maybe finish it off from that same funding source.
Thank you. And if a council did move forward with this motion, would staff recommend a motion to the effect, or is staff comfortable with?
Please.
Thank you. Okay, so we do have this motion on the floor. We can consider a subsequent motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? None are opposed. The motion carries. And I would make a motion arising that, and sorry, just a clarification from staff, would it only be Part E that would require the additional resource, or does it make it, is any distinction necessary with regards to the entirety of the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Ms. Clary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If there's additional analysis that is that you're hoping to have done, which it sounds like there is, then we would likely need additional budget to do that scope. However, I don't have an estimate on that at this time. We could get that and bring it forward in future.
Okay, I don't think there's any further analysis. I mean, definitely there's analysis with regards to E, but the others are, the consultant indicated that that information was available, it just hadn't been presented, per se.
Sorry, just further, if council wanted any of those graphs updated with removed parking data, then that would be additional analysis. So it depends really what you're looking for. If you're just looking for the numbers, then that's simple to do. But if you're looking for updated graphs to show where it is with respect to the 85%, that would be a little bit of additional analysis there.
Thank you. So appreciating that, Part D does indicate a parking utilization graph. So I'll pass a motion which pertains to this recommendation in its entirety, that additional budget be allocated from the town parking, offsite parking reserve.
Second.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, Councillor Keefe?
So, is it necessary for us to indicate an amount?
I don't think staff know the exact amount.
Oh,
There's an
okay.
estimate.
All right, sure.
I'll turn to Mr. Hissick if we need to provide a ceiling or.
I would recommend allocating a finite amount, say $10,000, to be funded from the parking reserve.
Okay, I will add the figure of $10,000 if turn to the seconder.
Approved.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Keefe. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Now back to the regular part of the agenda. We're at staff reports under 13A. We have the tree removal request at 2129 Bradford Avenue. A report from staff. I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please. Hello again, Ms. Clary.
Evening again. Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is a tree removal request for a generally healthy Douglas fir tree located at 2129 Bradford. The tree is approximately 1 meter from the existing house, and this request brought forward or brought light of the issue that the town doesn't actually address this in our bylaw. Several other municipalities in the region do have bylaws that address existing trees that have grown very close to existing buildings. However, the town's does not. If council does choose to approve this tree removal, staff do recommend that we revisit the tree preservation bylaw. Staff would look into a few different options and bring them forward for council's consideration prior to a bylaw amendment. There are a number of other things staff note in the report. The town's tree preservation bylaw is quite restrictive, so it does limit the amount of the scope of tree removals that can be approved at a staff level. So we could look at some of these other ones if council wanted to see fewer of these tree removals coming forward during council meetings. However, if council is okay with how things are, that doesn't need to be incorporated. And I'm here to answer if you have any questions.
Thanks, Ms. Clary. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions before we look to the two recommendations, and the questions could be regarding either recommendation. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Through you to staff. So I note that our arborist looked at the tree, it's healthy. Did they have any comment on the likelihood that this tree might cause damage to the foundation? Like, are they able to say that based on the size of this tree and the way the roots on this sort of tree spread out, that there would be some likelihood of it damaging the foundation in the future?
No, through to Councillor O'Keefe. The arborist is not a structural engineer. In other situations like this, we have required, for example, larger strata buildings where there's some evidence of cracking. We've required a report from a structural engineer. However, those situations were in larger parkades, more accessible for an engineer to go review. Where this sort of situation, it is hard to actually do an analysis on it. So no, it would really be up to a structural engineer. They would have to do a bunch of additional analysis to determine that.
a follow-up, if I may. So if council decided to amend the bylaw to delegate that responsibility to staff then to make decisions in these sorts of cases, so would you then be, say in a case like this, requiring the individual to go get an engineering assessment to determine whether this was likely to cause damage to their foundation? Just trying to figure out what the process would be if we did decide to delegate that to staff.
Yes, through to Councillor O'Keefe. Other municipalities in the region, the staff report does provide a couple examples, just have a distance from an existing building. For example, the district of Saanich allows tree removal if, depending on the height of a tree, if a tree is 8 meters or less at mature height. If it's within 2 meters of an existing building, they allow tree removals at a staff level, or if it's over 8 meters in height and within 3 meters of an existing building, they allow tree removals at staff level. And the district of Saanich allows tree removals if it's within 2 meters of an existing building for any tree. So those are sort of the examples that staff would look to when coming forward within a bylaw amendment. The bylaw amendment will take a bit of time, so the staff wouldn't get that authority until the bylaw amendment was adopted.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Rintoul.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And from you through to staff, Councillor Keith has spoken about the proximity to the foundation. My approach is a little different, or my concern is a little different. I don't know that I'd be super comfortable sleeping underneath those tree limbs, given the nature of storm events, and I'm referring to wind in particular. Did the town arborist, and forgive me if it's in here, but I didn't note the context, actually go up into the tree and get some reading in terms of the limbs and their, not necessarily their health, but their well-being?
Through to Councillor Rintoul, no, the town's arborist does a visual inspection when they do this sort of tree inspection. A more detailed arborist report could have been done by the homeowner, and we do recommend that homeowners get third-party arborist reports before we bring things like this forward to council, just to answer some of those questions. However, homeowners don't always choose to do so. So no, the town's arborist just does a visual inspection usually.
Yeah, thank you. And I was surprised that there wasn't a third-party arborist report here. But again, my observation is this is extremely close to the home, obviously. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I guess through you to staff, if we had an amendment in our bylaw in place, such as, central Saanich's, where it was, 3 meters and away and 8 meters tall or 2 meters flat. This tree, just looking at the pictures, looks like it's definitely within 3 meters and possibly even 2. So if we had a bylaw like that in place, this tree, would it have been included in it?
Yes, through to Councillor Duncan. If the town did have something in our bylaw that allowed tree removal within, say, 2 meters of a house, yes, this tree would have been permitted to be removed at a staff level.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. So we've had questions of staff, and so we have 2 recommendations. We should move them separately. So staff have provided the options for the first part. Councillor Duck?
Yeah, it's ready to move the recommendation.
Remove our recommendation?
Yes. That the request to remove the Douglas fir tree from 2129 Bradford Avenue be approved.
Second.
We have moved by Councillor Duck, seconded by Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to the mover and seconder.
Yeah, I think we need to start looking at our tree preservation bylaw and make some adjustments to it, because we do have trees that are encumbering on houses, and that wasn't the intent, obviously, but the trees have grown to maturity. And as Councillor Rintoul mentioned, we're in a situation where we've got significant climate change happening, and I think we need to provide the opportunity for homeowners to remove obstacles. And I fully support our tree preservation bylaw, and I'm hesitant to do this, but I'm also just keeping safety and security in mind when we're looking at our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. I reiterate with what Councillor Duck said. Bradford Avenue, this area is all within an area that is a higher density. We do have places within Sidney still that are environmentally sensitive areas and where maintaining perhaps a Douglas fir canopy might be a priority, but in this area, no. And Douglas fir is not a species that's compatible with compact urban dwelling, and whether this tree was left behind when the house was built or whether it was planted in a very ill-advised way afterwards, it's unfortunate that this tree is here because it can't persist in an environment like this. They're a species that's meant to be in a dense forest, it's specifically because of their vulnerability to wind when they're not in a stand. And so having a single tree like this close to the house, it's kind of a no-brainer to me, unfortunately, for this tree.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I won't support the recommendation. A few reasons. One being I have to rely on my arborist, and he says it's a generally healthy tree. The fact that there's no third-party report from another arborist concerns me, and there's no evidence or indication that there's been foundation damage. So we're making assumptions based on what might possibly happen. And for me, that's not a reason to lose a tree. And I'm also, to be honest, quite concerned about the fact that this application was put in April of last year, and our arborist recommended removal of the ivy at the time. And I was at this residence last week, and the evidence that ivy is still there and actually worse. So the fact of the matter is that left unabated, this tree's going to die anyway from the ivy. And so I'm concerned that this has been allowed to persist, knowing what kind of damage ivy causes to trees. And that's another reason why I won't support the recommendation. I would have supported denial. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Questions through to staff regarding a comment. Could staff comment on ivy and the health of the tree, please, over time, or in this particular situation? I appreciate we don't have our arborist before us this evening.
Through to the mayor, yes, ivy can choke out trees over time. I can't comment on how much longer this tree may survive, but there's nothing in our bylaws requiring property owners to remove ivy from trees.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to Councillor Novick.
Mr. Mayor, likewise, I have a question through you to staff, and that is, if an individual with a tree like this or in a similar situation, even outside that perimeter, makes a request for removal and the town denies that removal request and the tree subsequently is blown over in a storm and causes extensive damage, what is the town's position on liability in that case?
Ms. Clary.
Through to Councillor Novak. So the tree preservation bylaw does allow property owners to remove a tree if there are imminent hazards. So if a property owner did come into a situation where a tree was, becoming dangerous as a result of a storm, they would be permitted to remove it. They'd be required to contact the town within the next 48 hours or so, and the town's arborist would go and review it, and that would be what would happen there. But there is a clause in the town's bylaw. If someone's tree is actively becoming unsafe, they can remove it.
Maybe I was misunderstood. I'm sorry, Ms. Clary, but through the mayor to you again, my concern was not in that type of a case, but my concern was in a case where the request for removal had been denied by the town, and subsequent to that, a storm blew over the tree, and the tree fell into the house and caused damage. Would the town be in a liability situation?
Ms. Clary. First, I'll turn to Mr. Humble, if I might. Thank you, Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this question has come up in the past around risk and liability with respect to denial of tree removal requests and then the subsequent tree falling and creating damage to the property, or safety, etc. It's a challenging question for us to ask. I mean, we're talking about we're talking about case law, we're talking about legalities here, so. And I think, quite frankly, our lawyers may have already weighed in on this one as well. I think it's a very challenging question to be able to respond to, and certainly at a staff level. I mean, yet we could go out again and ask for another legal opinion on this, but I think we've done this in the past. And again, I think the case law that maybe has been reviewed would indicate that we're maybe not in a position of risk, but who knows, right? There's always the potential that we could be involved in a lawsuit, and we would have to get legal advice on that.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. And I do appreciate that information, and I think I think that question is more properly directed to our solicitor if we felt that it was a decision point for us, or a criteria for our decision point. I think there's going to be whatever the specific factors are around this particular case, not necessarily just what is in the staff report or what's been presented to us. And I don't think we can ask staff that are not part of our legal counsel to provide an answer. Councillor Novik, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I will vote for this motion. I guess I'm always concerned. I have this perhaps unnatural fear of trees falling on houses. And I am concerned when these situations are brought to our attention and not acted upon. So I'd like to see this, the second part eventually. I know we're talking to the first part right now, but I would like to see this go to its ultimate conclusion. And I think in this case, the tree definitely is a hazard and should be removed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novik. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'll support the motion. Want to comment on a couple things. I'm not necessarily supporting it because I think it's at risk of blowing over. I don't think it is. In other cases where we've looked at in terms of risk, and we've recommended that they come down, there has been arborist report from the individual and concurred with by our town arborist to say, yeah, this tree is failing. There's been a lot of big branches drop, and based on that, we think there is a risk. And my recollection is when there was a documented risk that we absolutely did go ahead and allow the removal of the tree. I don't think that risk has been demonstrated here. Having said that, I think that it's reasonable to assume that a tree that is so close to the house is likely to cause damage to the foundation. Speaking from experience, I can say that trees, not even, I have 2 trees in my front yard, and so they've got into the drain tiles, they mangled and twisted up my water line coming into the house. And so for us, I think it's a reasonable assumption that a tree that close to the house is going to cause some damage. And although it hasn't been documented yet, I think it's a reasonable assumption that that will eventually happen. And I would worry for the homeowner. I don't think the homeowner should have to wait until their foundation cracks or something happens. They're trying to mitigate that. So I think it's, in this case, okay to support this tree coming down. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you to staff, I just want something popped into my mind for clarification. Was this the property that came forward that was looking for removal of the tree to adapt the building or expand the building? Just I want to make sure that we're not just providing an opportunity for that to happen.
Ms. Clardy.
Through to Councillor Duck, not that I know of. However, I could look back in the records and get back to you on that. This tree hasn't come forward within the past year, for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Councillor Rintoul.
Point of privilege, I'd like to end debate and call the question, please.
Okay, we need to
So
take.
I'll move that.
It's moved. Sorry, I just don't, I was gonna see if there's any further speakers, but
I know, that's why I
it's on
would
the,
like to call
it's on the
question.
floor, and do we have a seconder? We have a seconder.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Garnett's opposed, the motion carries. I'll call the question, all in favor? Opposed? Councillor Garnett is opposed, the motion carries. Thank you.
I'd like to
unless
move.
we have the second recommendation?
I'd like to move the second recommendation that staff be authorized to bring forward an amendment to the tree preservation bylaw as described in the staff report dated March 13th, 2023.
Second.
Moved and seconded, any or I'll turn to the mover, Councillor Duck.
No, nothing yet.
I'll turn to the seconder.
As I mentioned earlier, I'd like to see this go through. I think the bylaw needs to be a little bit more considerate of actual situations out there in the field rather than a didactic approach to tree preservation and removal. I think staff will look at this in a very calculated way so that we will not be faced with frivolous requests to remove trees that are obviously not problematic, and that trees that are problematic should be able to be removed without too much discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just add that this is a motion that would have staff bring forward back to council an amendment to the preservation bylaw. Councillor Garnett?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I won't support the recommendation. I guess I'm stuck on a sentence, streamline tree removals, and hate to be the tree guy all the time, but I don't want it to be streamlined, and the report also speaks to additional workload for council. I don't consider this extra workload. I consider this providing a benefit to my community and the overall holistic approach to looking to how our community is going to go through climate change. During the last term, we adopted we did an urban forest strategy, and we during that tenure made the tree preservation bylaw more stringent, and I supported both of those with the goal of trying to make it more difficult to remove trees because of the value of trees in our community and the fact that we are a small community, and we need trees more than most because we have one of the lowest totals and according to 2019's results of 14.4% in the CRD. Our urban forest strategy speaks to having a net zero loss by 2030 and being 18% coverage by 2040. I think changes like this to this bylaw will help us to not get there. And I think of all the reasons trees are coming down through climate change, development. An article recently with the Saanich mayor speaking to concerns about neighbors without trees, and I also have that concern. We only have so many places we can plant trees, and eventually we're going to run out of room, and if we cut down all the ones we have, how do we get to where we want to be in terms of mitigating climate change? And I totally understand we can't compare apples and oranges, one municipality to another, but it was something that we thought was of a paramount value during the last term, and we have that 18% figure actually now in our OCP, and so. Not saying that staff won't make good recommendations, but I look at some of the examples here for construction of a driveway, and I can't be the only one that sees that as ironic. We're going to remove a healthy tree that helps mitigate climate change and helps make our community a better place to live, to allow cars to park, which actually increase GHGs and make our community a worse place to live and make climate change worse. It's not lost on me that that's bizarre, and maybe we won't support that recommendation. Maybe we won't come back. But I just feel like once we open the box, once we open the door, where do we stop it? Do we stop it at 2 meters, 3? Is it 5? Is it 10? There's a patio, there's a driveway, there's a fence. Okay, no trees on any lots. There's a house, and maybe that seems extreme, and it is. But I'm trying to think from a future perspective of what community we're going to leave for people and generations to come, and I just don't like this. I like the fact that we have something that's stringent. I like the fact that council is that gatekeeper that makes that decision that will have that overall benefit for the community, because that's our role. And I take that role very seriously. Not that nobody else does up here, but it's something I've evolved into over my course of being on council. And I always feel like I have to fight for trees because I've learned through time just how incredibly important a resource they are for our community. And I value other people's opinions, and I understand where they're coming from, but I just feel like this is my sword to fall on, so to speak. I just don't want to see what I perceive to be a weakening of the preservation bylaw. So, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you,
Thank you
Councillor
for
Garnett.
indulging me.
I'm going to turn to Mr. Humble for a moment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, no, appreciating Councillor Garnett's comments for sure. I just wanted to point out, and Council's aware of this, I mean, one of the reasons why you see these requests for tree removal is because the initial tree removal was denied by staff. And now the proponent is appealing that. And the process is they come forward to council. So from a staff perspective, staff actually undertaking this additional sort of aspect of them being given the authority or latitude under certain conditions or circumstances to be able to approve these things is a massive responsibility for staff. One that staff certainly wouldn't take lightly, and certainly to this point don't take lightly when applications are made, given the number of denials that staff have been provided the proponents, and as I said, the appeals come forward. So, staff, I think very much are consider themselves a bit of gatekeepers with respect to the tree preservation bylaw, and I think would continue to sort of be that check and balance when submissions are made. What they're trying to do is take that additional sort of onus off of council with respect to being put in the position to make those challenging decisions after staff have already recommended denial. And we've seen what has happened in the number of requests that have come forward. So I just wanted to point that out, that it's not a responsibility that certainly staff would take lightly. And I think it would be reflected in the bylaw that they bring, the bylaw amendment that they would bring forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I'll turn to first-time speakers, Councillor Duck. Councillor Keefe.
I have to concur with everything that Councillor Garnett said, and that was one of my concerns in bringing this forward. But I'm also trying to find a balance point between what is the safety and responsibility for we have for safety of our citizens and residents. And I'm trusting, essentially, especially based on Mr. Humble's comments, that staff will bring back an amendment to this that will define what those rules are more so. And I think we have to find within our tree preservation bylaw some standards and some definitions to what is reasonable and what is safe and what is appropriate. And Councillor Duncan mentioned earlier just about the type of tree that's in there, and Douglas fir in particular in this case doesn't have a strong life cycle when it's standing alone. So I think it's important to give some definition to our tree preservation bylaw that does give the latitude to staff to better direct itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I just want to make a comment before going further and further discussion. This motion is authorizing staff to bring forward an amendment to the tree preservation bylaw. We don't have what those details would be, and where I appreciate the views that are being expressed, but I believe we will be deliberating to some degree when the amendment comes forward, and so I'll just leave council with those comments, and I'll turn to Councillor Keefe.
Thank you. I support the motion. I understand Councillor Garnett's comments. I think everyone at this table would agree about the value there is to trees to our community, no doubt about that. The point is, though, the unfortunate reality is that a lot of trees were built in places that they shouldn't have been years ago, and as those continue to grow, we're going to see more of those. And I guess the question is, who makes the call in terms of whether those are gonna come down or not? I think what's proposed here, that staff will come back with some guidelines in terms of what they think is appropriate from, they'll consult with arborists and that. And so I'm interested to see that. I don't know that, me as a counselor, I have anything more that I could contribute. I'm not an arborist, I don't know anything about trees, so I would depend on staff to be the gatekeeper on this once we establish some policy on it. So I'm happy to see this go forward and see what staff come back with. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Garner is opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. I'll turn to item 13B, which is the subdivision application number SA 100223, waiver of frontage requirement at 2293 Adela Place. And I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please. Hello, Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. This application is, as you said, a request to waive the frontage requirement for 2 lots proposed to be subdivided from 1 parcel on 2293 Adela. There's legislation and also a town bylaw requirement that 10% of every lot being subdivided has to, 10% of the perimeter of the lot must front onto the street. This property here is located at the end of the cul-de-sac of Adela Place. It has a small frontage already, so splitting it would result in 6.4% of one lot, Lot A, fronting onto the street, and 7.3% of the perimeter of Lot B fronting onto the street. So the town has seen many applications like this for subdivision of lots at the end of cul-de-sacs, and the report provides some context. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. Are there any questions for staff before we look to the motion? Seeing none, we have a recommendation.
I'll move that section 4.1 of subdivision and development bylaw number 1390, that no parcel of land has less than 10% of its perimeter fronting on a street, be waived for the proposed lots A and B of the subdivision of 2293 Adela Place.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Councillor Rintoul?
Yeah, no, thank you. I recognize, I take it that, the approving officer normally would have the right to address subdivisions if it weren't for this particular, waiver that's being sought. It is certainly a unique, shape parcel of land, and I know we've seen this elsewhere in the community where, a large property like this will be given some discretion shown to be able to permit housing to be built in these scenarios. So I'll support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to the seconder. Councillor Duck? No? Any further discussion? Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I will support this recommendation. And I do appreciate, on top of the discussion we've just had, I appreciate the fact that based on the information we provided here, that the footprints of the buildings are allowing, and the driveway actually construction is allowing for protected trees to be retained. But I mean, the only concern I have is that if too many of our cul-de-sacs have these same kind of pie shapes, and if we do it too many times, then I'm worried about the infill becoming too great based on the size of the parameters of the cul-de-sac. But with this particular case, I'm more than happy to support it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Council, just before we go to item 13C, I did mean while we were on item 12C, which were the recommendations flowing from from Committee of the Whole with regards to the parking study, we did receive a piece of correspondence during approval of the agenda from Mr. Eric Diller. And I noted in his correspondence that he made several points with regards to recommendations that we're going to be considering at a future meeting. They're the longer term. And so I didn't feel they were something that we would necessarily address this evening, and we didn't speak to those. I would I'll make a motion to refer it to the meeting where we're discussing those long-term aspects.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Call a question. All in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. And now we'll turn to 13C, which is the Mary Winspear Center Funding Agreement. And we do have a recommendation. With the recommendation on the floor, we can certainly ask staff questions or have debate. Go ahead, Councillor Keefe.
Thank you. One thing I was wondering about, questioning through you to staff, is I see that there's provision in the agreement for percentage to go into the capital fund, which is good. What I wondered relating to that is do they have an updated capital management and replacement plan in place?
I'll turn to staff, perhaps Mr. Hissick.
I don't know. We have not had the oversight over the years for me to check on that. Pretty much, they are their own separate entity. We have to defer to that to some degree. But now that it's enshrined in this agreement, it'll give us the mechanism we need to ensure it's in place.
Okay. I was, my recollection, maybe through you for staff to confirm, is when the Shaw Center came to us a few years ago for additional support. And one of the things I believe we asked of them was to prepare such a plan. So what we were looking and what we required them to do is take an inventory of their assets, the value of the assets, and what amount of money should be allocated to replace those, and a timeline in that.
Yeah, I think I'll turn to staff if they wish to speak, but I think a distinction with the Shaw Center is that the town owns the space at the aquarium, and we do not have that ownership of Mary Winspear property. Mr. Hissick?
That is correct, Mr. Mayor, and at that time they were coming to the town for a large increase in funding, so we were in a position to dictate some terms, if you will, whereas that's not necessarily the case here.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Hissick.
Okay, thank you for that.
You're welcome. Councillor Duck?
I would like to move forward with the recommendation.
Please, go ahead.
The recommendation, I so move that the Mary Winspear Center funding agreement with the Memorial Parks Society be approved.
I'll second that for discussion.
We have it moved and seconded. Councillor, I would like to propose 2 amendments before discussion. And the first amendment is regarding section 4A under reporting. And the amendment is that the MPS shall provide notice to the town of the completion of their annual general meeting, AGM, and shall submit to the town annual financial statements as approved by the MPS membership at the AGM within 30 days of the completion of the AGM. If there's a seconder, I'll motivate.
Second.
My distinction in making this amendment is that the motion in the section of the agreement indicates that financial statements is approved by the MPS board, and then they would come to the town. In essence, the Memorial Park Society is making them public at their AGM, and it is a process at the AGM for the membership to approve annual financial statements. So I think it's more appropriate timing for it to go to the AGM, but there's also a time limit on them then submitting it to the town. Councillor Rintoul?
Yeah, I think to clarify, and I don't know that staff can confirm this, I think the procedure at the annual general meeting is for them to receive the financials. I think it is the responsibility of the board to approve them, and that at the AGM, the function under the Society Act, I believe, is to receive the financials, although
They are, but the membership can also question staff or the auditor.
I don't have a problem with the direction that's suggested. I guess the timeline here is that staff are suggesting is within 90 days of the fiscal year, and under your amendment, it would be within 30 days completion of the AGM. So I guess what you're ensuring with that suggestion or that amendment is that those would, at that point, because they've been presented, would indeed be the financial review, the financials versus the draft financials, so to speak, that the board just sees. So I think I'm comfortable with where you're headed.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Keith and Councillor Duck.
My question was, I guess I'm wondering, in the event that they don't have an AGM, but they've done their financial statements, do we not want to see those? So I'm wondering if the original idea that staff had in terms of having something within 90 days of their year end is better wording. Because if they don't, with this wording, if they don't have an AGM, then we're not going to see anything.
Yeah, thanks for the question. This society and other societies have had the experience as well, that while on a usual basis, upon the completion of their fiscal year, whether it's a December 31st fiscal or whether it's a March 31st fiscal, whatever it is, that they try to complete the review of their financials within a 2 to 3 month period and then have an AGM. There are circumstances where there's a delay in the review of the financials, not to the extent that there was the situation that arose, but just in the normal circumstances. So it could be pushed beyond 90 days. So there's a question about whether they hold an AGM or not, or a question. I think knowing that the regular cycle is for the Mary Winspear or for societies is that they complete their financials in approximately 90 days and then have an AGM. Is if it didn't look like they were doing that, staff could reach out. We have a limited number of these agreements, so in the future I would consider we would have a limited number of these agreements. Councillor Duck?
Yes, and just in my experience, it is the requirement, especially of charities, to present reviewed financials at the AGM following the fiscal year. So there is a requirement there within the BC Societies Act and from the CRA to make sure that this is completed. I will support this motion, and I'm going to offer a friendly amendment that can we make it effective AGM 2023. So essentially we've heard from Councillor Rintoul that the AGM is planned for in April, and I would like to see a report coming to us for the 2023 AGM. Thank you.
So, thank you, Councillor Duck, and that's a good point. So staff have indicated in the report that that the MPS Executive Director has signed off on this, so we're in essence amending this. So if Council approves this tonight as amended, if we amend it or not, then it would, if it has an amendment, then it would go back to the Executive Director, and I presume that would be dealt with in a reasonable time period, given what's transpired to date. But I don't think we can, without the Mary Winspear Centre signing off on this, we can't impose that occur this year until they've signed off on this agreement. But it would, if they sign it, then it would take effect immediately, which would pertain to this this year. Does that help? Yeah, thank you. Councillor Novick?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Perhaps I'm missing something, but the amendment that's proposed, I think, conflicts with the reporting requirement of the agreement, in that it says that the MPS shall submit town financial statements approved by the MPS board. Now, typically, annual financials are approved by the board at the AGM.
No, they're approved by the board prior to going to the AGM. They have to be approved by the board to go to the AGM.
Regardless, the likelihood of the AGM of 30 days beyond the AGM happening prior to that 90-day limitation, I think, is pretty small. And so we're guaranteed with the agreement of seeing the financials within 90 days. I'm not sure what the point of the amendment is.
Sorry, one of the points of the amendment is that the membership does review the financials at the AGM. That's a purpose of the AGM. The other point that I may have touched on is that the board releasing the financials to the town is in advance of them making them public at the AGM. And I think it's appropriate for an arm's length organization to make its financials public through their AGM prior to them being submitted to the town.
One of my other concerns is that we're not asking for audited statements
So,
or reviewed or anything. We're not asking, I mean, typically an organization like this would at least have, at a very minimum, notice to reader, but typically a review engagement, if not an audit. And we're not asking for any of that, which
it's a good,
I don't agree with.
it's a good question, and I have thought of that, and actually asked staff offline on that. And each organization, in its circumstances, by board resolution, will have a requirement to complete a financial review at a certain level. Some require an audit, some require engagement, some require notice to reader. Those are the three levels. And so the organization that is arm's length to the town of Sidney has a requirement as to what their level of financial review of the statements are. I don't think it's the purview of the town to be imposing a review of a certain level on the town, or on the external organization. But you have the floor, Councillor.
Yeah, I politely disagree, because we're asking for this agreement because we're concerned about financial performance and what happens to our funding that goes to the organization. And one of the ways of us having some assurance that the funding is not going awry or astray is to have that type of third-party review of the statement. If I look at this agreement closely...
Sorry, if I just might interject for a moment, you mentioned third-party review. An organization is required to have an accountant external to the organization review their financials. They don't do it internally.
I hear you, but
Okay.
we don't say that in the agreement.
No, it's not a choice of the society.
But we could ask for a third-party review.
Okay, I appreciate your comments. I'm actually going to turn to staff if they perhaps have a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you point out, this is an external board that will impose their own requirements if they're not already imposed by legislation under the Societies Act. So at this point, I'm not sure if they require audited statements or whether it's the other term that escapes me that Councillor Novak mentioned, but we have to assume that they have learned from this episode and they will do what they have to ensure the integrity of their statements.
Councillor Novak, if you wish to proceed further, there's an amendment on the floor. We can take one amendment to the amendment. So if you wanted to amend it, but I've kind of motivated on a hypothetical amendment that you might make, and I appreciate it started as a question, but it kind of turned into deliberation.
I'm not quite sure how to amend this at this time. I'm happy to go on the amendment and then maybe get back to the original question where we can discuss the agreement as a whole.
Well, sorry, so the clause 4A in the agreement is presented to us, as well as my amended motion does refer to annual financial statements. Amendment could be annual audited financial statements or annual financial review engagement. That's the term used for the second level. Again, I don't want to motivate any further on it unless there's a motion on the floor.
I'd like to do that. However, as Mr. Hissick mentioned, we don't know what their requirements are, and we don't want to upset the apple cart.
And I think that's why staff have made the case as why it's drafted as is.
But I guess my point is, shouldn't we have found that out before drafting the agreement?
That can be motivation on a proposed amendment that you're making. So I'll leave you to decide whether to make an amendment, and we can motivate further on an amendment.
Point of clarification, if I may, I'd just like to understand, was your intent to remove the wording in 4A as is presented in the docket and replace it with the wording you've put forward?
Yes.
Thank you. In which case, The amendment you're suggesting makes sense to me. And
Sorry, Councillor, you asked a point of clarification. I've acknowledged. Councillor Novak, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, all right, that wasn't clear from the amendment, but if the amendment is replacing 4A,
Yes, I'm
Then-
sorry I didn't indicate that in the.
then, yeah, that's a totally different story there. Then I would probably support it as written, and then I'd be happy to discuss the rest of the report at a later time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Garnett, and then Councillor Duck, and then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mayor. Just seeking a little more clarification as well. Now that thank you for that point, Councillor Rintoul. We have no control over when they have an AGM.
Sorry, if I may just
I
interject.
just- that's
for a
what I wanna
moment.
know.
The Societies Act indicates when a society must have its AGM.
Okay, I'm just wondering about that because of what's happened in the past, where they've not happened or happened much later. So, under that context, 30 days after, if they don't meet that, what the Societies Act saying, and this one's saying 90 days, I'm having trouble. If I can understand, I prefer it to be like a designated time, just in case something happens where an AGM doesn't happen when it's supposed to, so that we're making sure we're getting the numbers far sooner than later. Whereas this is sitting 30 days after.
Ye-
For some reason it's delayed, then it's much later, whereas this is 90 days at the end of the fiscal year, then it's 90 days.
I take the intent of this agreement to be that we want on an annual basis for this particular society to report that they've had their AGM, that they've had their financial statements completed and reviewed and submitted to the town. I'm myself, I'm not concerned of what the timing of that is. The Societies Act does provide some flexibility on the timing of a society's AGM because there are circumstances apart from COVID. In pre-COVID times, the societies, there was some variance as to when they held their AGM. You still have the floor,
No,
Councillor?
that's fine, thank you.
Okay, I still have Councillor Duck and Councillor O'Keefe.
So the BC Societies Act requires a registered society to hold an AGM every 13 months. They don't have a choice in that, and if they must file one. And so part of those requirements, both for the charity and the nonprofit, is they have to provide financial statements at the same time that have been approved by the board and are brought before the membership for voting and affirmation. So I think this clause or this amendment makes sense because they have to follow those regulations. That's a requirement. I think, as Councillor Rintoul mentioned, that they have learned their lesson certainly over the last 3 years, and I think they're going to do much more in terms of making sure they stay in line. We cannot require a external authority, external nonprofit to determine how they review their financials, whether it's notice to read or review or audit. We can't require that unless we choose to pay for it. That's their prerogative, is to set their financial review structure, and we can't demand that of it unless we provide the funding to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Well, hopefully they've learned from their mistakes. I don't know, because nobody from their board has come forward to talk to us to say, here's what happened, here's what we're putting in place. So I'm sympathetic to Councillor Garnett's comments, is that in terms of, if they don't have an AGM like they didn't for 3 years, then what? Having said that, I'm willing to go along with this, and we will be more vigilant as well. I think we have a responsibility to be looking at this. And man, if I don't see some financial statements or an AGM, we're going to be asking some questions. So I'm happy with that. In terms of the audited financial statements, I get the point that maybe we can't, but it seems to me we should be able to, if we're giving them 3% of our tax revenue, that a condition of that, it seems reasonable to me that we should be able to ask for annual audited financial statements. So I'll propose an amendment, and we'll see what council thinks about that, that I would,
So this is an amendment to the amendment. Please proceed, Councillor.
yeah, to just insert, in the second line, shall submit to the town annual audited financial statements.
Do we have a seconder?
A second for discussion.
Okay, we now have a seconder. Councillor O'Keefe, did you wish to motivate further?
No, I think basically, we're giving them over 300,000 a year of taxpayers' money. I think, in terms of our fiduciary duty, it's reasonable for us to ask for audited financial statements.
Thank you,
Especially based on, the history that there's been for the last 3 years.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, with some institutional history, I'm aware that in a prior lifetime and many years ago that the Mary Winspear Center MPS Board budgeted for financial audit annually. What we've seen in recent years, is more a systemic problem, and we are going to see, in conjunction with their annual general meeting, the statements which have gone through a financial review, and we may see, from that yes, there is a need to adopt a higher level of scrutiny, or to recommend a higher level of scrutiny, than a financial review, which is more in depth option than the notice to reader, which is, as was noted previously, sort of the lowest level of third-party involvement. I think I'm satisfied with the spirit of this agreement, and having attended their recent meeting in January, and know that they continue to budget for a third-party accounting firm to conduct a financial review. I think I'm satisfied, for now at that level of review, and I'm also cognizant of the comments by Councillor Duck that it would be out of place for us to request that level of review without offering additional financial support to pay for it. So it does, to me, feel like there may be room to revisit this discussion, but I don't know at this point in time, with respect to the amendment that's before us, that I'll support it. I'll wait to see what my other colleagues have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Could I ask a question of clarification from your report earlier this evening? Did you indicate that that MPS was proceeding with an audit for 2022?
I indicated that the MPS, the Mary Winspear Center operational financials for 2022 were currently under a financial review.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe, you had the floor? No? Okay, Councillor Novick? This is the amendment to the amendment.
Yes, and I'm afraid that, unfortunately, as much as I like the idea, I would have to vote against this, because we're basically saying to them, we'll give you $300,000 and some odd, but we're going to take 8% of that and force you to have an audit, where I think a review engagement would be sufficient. A notice to reader isn't a review at all. It's simply, it's not even a standard of review. They just prepare financial statements from information given to them. A review engagement does involve the third-party involvement in reviewing their financial operations. And so I like Councillor O'Keefe's idea. I think that her heart's in the right place. However, I would make a friendly amendment to change that amendment to the amendment to the amendment.
I'm sorry, we can't proceed
Too
that
many?
way. Yeah.
Too many amendments?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
well, I'll have to vote against that one, because
We
I
have a
don't
simple
think it's
amendment
appropriate.
to consider this time, whether to insert the word audited
Yeah.
before annual statements.
Yeah, I think that's too much of a burden to place on them, so I'm afraid I'd be against that.
Thank you, Councillor. Further discussion on the amendment to the amendment to insert the word audited. I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Duck, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Garnett, myself, Councillor Rintoul, and Councillor Novick are opposed. The motion is defeated. So we're back to the amendment to the amendment. Is there any further discussion
So I'd like to make an amendment to this amendment, similar to
Please go ahead.
Councillor O'Keefe's, and I would simply insert the word review engagement, submit to the town review engagement annual financial statements, or annual financial statements with a review engagement.
I think review engagement annual statements is understood in that community, in the accounting community.
However the syntax comes out.
Okay,
that
do we have a seconder? Councillor O'Keefe, seconds. I'll turn to you to motivate further, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think one of my big concerns with this agreement is that there's no recourse and there's very little consequence to anything going wrong other than us finding out about it. We will find out about it. I think if we're providing that much money, and I've dealt with organizations my entire life that provided money to companies or not-for-profits, and typically they want something in return. They want at least some kind of an assurance that their funding is going to be spent properly. And one of the ways of doing that is to have their financials reviewed by a third-party accounting firm. I think that's the only way we're going to get any kind of satisfaction on this agreement. Otherwise, I don't see the value of having the agreement at all if we're not going to insist on a certain level of performance in order to justify our providing that funding. So I think that's a minimum to proceed with this project, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll speak briefly, and that is, I think I won't support the motion because without knowing what this society is required to do or what the board have approved doing, is that it's speculation on our part at this time, and doesn't necessarily put a certain standard in place. There may be a higher standard already in place that we're not aware of. I'll leave my comments there. Any further discussion? Councillor Duck?
Yeah, I won't support this motion either. I think we can't encumber the society. I think they will do that on their own. As a former board member of the charitable side of the Mary Winspear Center Foundation, up until 2018, they did do a review engagement on all of those, and that wasn't a requirement. That was the standard they held, as Councillor Rintoul mentioned, and his previous association with them. And I think this is that we have to leave it to the organization to determine what they are. I don't think they'll accept just a lower level one. I think they'll have a minor, at least of a review, if not an audit, given the reflection they've had in the past experience they've done. And I don't think we can request that of them. As Councillor Novak mentioned, that we give them a certain amount of money and then say you have to spend a percentage of this on your financial review. I don't think that's quite appropriate. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've had a full debate. I'll look to call the question. All in favor? Sorry, this is, this is on the amendment to the amendment, which is to insert review engagement before annual statements. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Councillor Duck, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Garnett, myself, Councillor Rintoul, the motion is defeated. So we're left with the amendment to the original amendment.
Just a point of information, I thought I made a friendly amendment to add the idea of initiating that in 2023, and I don't know where that ended up, whether it actually has to be.
Sorry, I think I spoke to that and indicated that without us having this agreement will only be in force if Mary Winspear signs it, and if they do sign it before the AGM in April, it would take effect this year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question on the amendment to 4A. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. I do have a second amendment, and it is a replacement for 4B, and that is that the MPS chair and or executive director shall make an annual presentation to the town council on their operations and benefit to the community upon the completion of their annual general meeting within 60 days of the completion of the AGM.
Second.
I'll motivate briefly on this. I think the process, we've already had some discussion with regards to the process. I think this ensures that they are coming forward. They're coming forward in a reasonable time frame. An executive director or the most responsible staff person in an organization reports out at the annual general meeting on the previous year to the members, and I think that information is made public then and is more appropriate to come, a presentation to come to council after it's been through the AGM. Councillor Rintoul. Or sorry, I'll turn to the seconder.
I just want to support this motion because I think it responds or answers a number of concerns we have about the lack of information we've gotten from the Memorial Park Society, and that this will offer an opportunity to provide an annual update as to where they stand and address some of those concerns we've had that we will get resolved in a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you. Mayor, if you could clarify, is it your intent that this amendment would include the MPS chair and or executive director also presenting on their financial statements as part of operations? And I ask because the reference above refers to the town, in 4A does refer to the town receiving the financials. That's at the staff level. I'm assuming the opportunity for council to be familiar with the operations would include the financial well-being of the operations. Is that your intent, or does this need to be clear?
I think that's the intent, and I think the experience for the organizations, I'm now going back almost 20 years, over 20 years, that these organizations, when they do make annual presentations, certainly make reference to their financial performance.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. So with those two amendments, I will now turn to, we have the motion on the floor for the amended motion. Is there further discussion about this, other aspects of this agreement? Further discussion or questions through the staff? I'll turn to Councillor Novick and then Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, as I mentioned earlier, my big concern with this agreement is what is the purpose of the agreement? And maybe that's rhetorical at this point, but I would suggest that the purpose of this agreement is so that we have a sense of how the funds that we're donating to them are being spent, and if they're being spent in a manner that is consistent with the wishes of council and our taxpayers, essentially. However, I don't see any of that in the agreement, and I'm concerned that the agreement is kind of, and excuse my expression, a vanilla agreement which doesn't have any teeth. It doesn't have any consequences for their failure to meet certain standards. There are no, we have no recourse if we've given them a whole bunch of money and their financial performance is below our expectations. And I would think that an agreement such as this would do exactly that, would give us some comfort in knowing that if they fail to achieve a certain level of financial performance, which is the reason we're all here talking about this today, that we have some recourse, that we can either withhold some or all of the funding or impose further requirements on them. Otherwise, what's the point of having the agreement? I don't see it as being a benefit to us if there aren't going to be consequences or to the organization, or give the town some recourse in finding that their financial performance is below expectations.
Okay,
And
so Councillor Novak, I appreciate the point you were making, but you're almost motivating for a possible amendment that hasn't been put on the floor. So if you are looking for this agreement to accomplish more than it is doing, or in your view, more than it is, than you believe it is, it would be appropriate to make an amendment to say that something should be changed in this agreement. I don't know how we move forward, other than you choosing not to support the agreement in general. But without specific direction to staff or without council making a specific amendment, I'm not sure we have moved forward through what you're motivating about aspects of this.
Point of clarification.
Sorry, go ahead.
Could we not refer
Point
to
of
staff
procedure?
to clarify? Sure. Could we not refer to staff to clarify, and clarify, to Councillor Novak that we do have the opportunity annually through the budget process to do what he's suggesting? Can we not look to staff to perhaps offer that clarification? Because I think this discussion could go on for a very long time, when in reality, we do have the ability to alter funding, halt funding, stop funding, if council were to amend its budget. I'm not suggesting we would. I'm saying there's some capacity there for council to review this, and if that's not the case, we'll have to go through this prolonged discussion, if that can be clarified.
Okay, thank you. So I'm, Councillor, I am gonna come back to you, Councillor Novak, but it was a point of procedure, which is actually a question to your staff, but I'm gonna accept it, and I will turn to Mr. Hissick, and then I might have a comment as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, the amount of funding is not set through our budget. It's set by an existing agreement that's tied to the parking agreement that we signed in 2017. We do not have the leeway under that agreement to change the level of funding until that expires in June of 2032. So we went into developing this financial accountability policy, if you will, acknowledging that the funding is set by a separate agreement. So to some degree, our hands were a little bit tied by how much we can hold their feet to the fire here. I think we have to take all that into consideration. And in terms of us being in a position to judge how well they run this community theater, we are not community theater operators. I'm not sure we have the expertise as staff, certainly, to judge how well they're doing on their mandate. We are here to financially sustain this community amenity, and I'm not sure punitive measures would serve that purpose.
Okay, so I see hands going up. Councillor Novak has the floor, and I will ask for speakers after Councillor Novak, but I do wish to speak to some points Councillor Novak made. And that is, one of the comments was that that council have the opportunity, or that the Memorial Park Society spends their funds as council may wish or direct. Council does not direct how the Memorial Park Society spends the grant that we provide, other than the provision to set aside 10% for a capital replacement reserve. The main point I want to make is that we provide grants to several community organizations based on the community benefit that they provide. It is I believe it's council's purview to, on behalf of the residents or behalf of the community, to appreciate or to express opinion on the benefit that the organization is bringing to, as Mr. Hissick has suggested, become community center or theater or whatever events that they're holding, to become commentators on that, I don't believe is in the purview of council. We have heard otherwise in specific circumstance, such as the Shaw Center and an engineering report. So I think we need to be careful. And so your question was, what's the purpose of the agreement? The purpose of the agreement is to have in place reporting mechanisms by which we understand that they are following the practices that they are required to under the Societies Act, to have annual general meetings, to have financial reporting done, and to advise the town that it's been done, and then present to council on an annual basis. And I intentionally inserted the words, a presentation to the council on their operations and benefit to the community. That I believe is where our purview is. Councillor Novak, I'll return the floor to yourself and then go to questioners, to other council members, Councillor Duncan and Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So what confused me, I guess, was the title, funding agreement, because it suggests that this agreement is what constitutes the funding program, but Mr. Hissick clarified that for me, and so now I understand that the funding agreement is related to the parking and not so much the operation of the center in specific. It's a quid pro quo that has already been set up, and we have no ability to change that until, as Mr. Hissick said, that agreement comes to an end. So that totally changes the nature of this, and maybe that wasn't clear to me at first, and obviously it wasn't, because I'm sort of used to funding agreements where there is a quid pro quo, and in this case there isn't. But I accept that we have a right, if we are giving them money, to know how they're operating and whether they're operating in a financially prudent or a fiscally prudent manner. And this would, I suspect, give us that bit of information. And my comments earlier about there being no recourse or consequence to them failing to do that, I suspect would be covered by the other agreement that dictates how that funding program is.
So Mr. Hissick did provide clarification that there is not aspects in the other agreement, the parking agreement,
No, but whatever there is.
for the town to suspend payments or
Fair
terminate
enough,
the
but
lease.
whatever there is there, and subsequently shouldn't be covered by this agreement. So if that's the case, then I understand. This is a very different thing than I was anticipating. And I'm okay with it because we don't really have a choice.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Novak. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan and then Councillor Keefe.
I don't know if I have much to say if Councillor Novak is now satisfied with the nature of this funding agreement.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm concerned about much of the tenor of this entire conversation about this third-party organization and our degree of oversight for it that seems to be radically outside of our jurisdiction. I think a major misunderstanding is also about what the irregularities, the financial issues that they had, and who they were actually accountable to when those things happen. And it wasn't the town they let down, it was their own board and their own process, and some government of Canada and the province of BC under the Societies Act. And so we kind of keep going at this about like this idea that what if they fail again, what if they do it again? And you know, that's not really our issue. If the existing laws that are in place regarding, you know, declaring things and taxes weren't enough to stop it in the first place, I don't know what more the town of Sidney's verbiage in our funding agreement was going to stop that sort of thing in the first place or have higher consequences. And so the continued discussion around that sort of thing, I don't see it as productive, and I would just dearly love to call the question.
Okay, thank you. So I would turn to council colleagues if you have other aspects of the agreement that you have concerns with. I don't think we need to motivate in support of the agreement. Councillor Keefe?
What I'll just point out, maybe it will make Councillor Novak feel a bit better, perhaps, is what I point to is in the first paragraph, it says, in consideration of the funding provided by the town to MPS and in accordance with the terms and conditions of the agreement, the parties agree to as follows. And then it lays out the requirements. So from that, what I take away is that although under the existing agreement that we have with them to give them the funds, we have no recourse. But by them signing this, we're sort of enshrining that there's some obligations that they have. So I think this strengthens our position somewhat in terms of consequence. And I think that's the best we can do. And I think in terms of just comments in regards to going outside of our purview, I think any time that we're giving a significant amount of money to an community organization, taxpayers' money, I think we have a fiduciary duty to make sure that the funds are, the requirements that they're supposed to operate under are followed. And I think this document tightens that up. So I'm fine to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keefe. Seeing, your microphone is still on, Councillor Novak. Sometimes that's a signal you might want to speak, so I appreciate that. So seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question on the main motion to approve the Mary Winspear Center funding agreement as amended with the Memorial Park Society be approved. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you, Council. We're going to turn to item 13D, which is Victoria Irish Dancers, their March 18th event. We have a report from staff. We could proceed with the recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation that the Victoria Irish Dancers' use of amplification during their March 18th, 2023 performance at Beacon Park be approved.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, motion carries. So we'll turn to item 13E, which is the monthly building report for February 2023.
Move for seat?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll turn to item 13F, the year-end policing report for 2022, and we have a recommendation.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to thank Staff Sergeant Conley for the report and just reiterate something mentioned in the past. And one thing I drew from this that really stood out to me is the hospital wait times. On average, they've gone up 38 minutes from 2020 and over 40% since 2021, average of 2 hours and 19 minutes. And so hopefully somebody in the provincial government or federal government's watching this. And so when we talk about staffing concerns at hospitals, it's not always just about nurses and doctors and meeting patients. It's getting people in the system quicker so that our officers can be back on the street, serving the community, protecting us. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we're turning to 14A under correspondence, the Sidney's draft economic development plan, the letter from South Island Prosperity Project dated January 30th. We have a recommendation.
I would like to move forward with the recommendation, not the one that's listed here. I would like to suggest that I make a motion to make sure that this information is included in the economic development plan review and not just received for information.
Okay, sorry. Thank you for the motion, Councillor Duck. But I'll turn to staff. Is our staff not be, given that they have received this and given that they are working on a future report to council, are they not considering this this information while they're doing that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, staff are including this as part of the review process, certainly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you wish to proceed, Councillor Duck?
Yes, to receive for information.
Thank you.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. And we're now turning to item 14B, which is an email from the Sidney Rotary Club regarding Rotary Club grants. And we have a recommendation.
I'll move we refer to staff to determine potential projects.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any discussion to referral to staff? Seeing none, all in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. And we're turning to the items under correspondence for information.
Move receipt for information.
Second?
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. So we are turning to item number 16 and notices of motion. Our council procedure is that if a member of council is bringing forward a notice of motion, that it be read into the first meeting, that would be this evening, and that it will, the motion as read out will appear on the subsequent council meeting agenda for council to deliberate at that time. So I will read the motion, notice of motion that I've that I'm bringing forward. We will not have we do not need a seconder. We do not will not have any debate, and it will appear on the next council agenda. And my motion is with regards to our our current strategic plan, and it begins, whereas the 2018 to 2022 strategic plan had an affordability housing priority and actions. Specifically, number 3 in that plan was affordable housing. 3A was that the town will continue to look for opportunities to collaborate with partners, e.g. the Capital Regional District, provincial and federal governments, housing societies and developers. 3B, that they continue to review short-term vacation rentals, and 3C, to implement affordable housing policies and initiatives following the completion of the official community plan review. And whereas the 2023 to 2026 strategic plan, recently approved, has housing priorities and actions, specifically number 2, that we will implement housing policies and initiatives from our official community plan. And 2A is, through review of the zoning bylaw, create conditions to increase number and types of housing. And 2B is that the town will continue to look for opportunities to collaborate with partners, as previously stated. And whereas types of housing may mean different tenures and levels of affordability, more clarity may be provided. Therefore, be it resolved that Council amend the housing priority and actions wording in the 2023 to 2026 strategic plan as follows. Through the review of the zoning bylaw and other initiatives, create conditions to increase the number and types of housing, including different levels of affordability. That concludes that motion being read in. I will now move to a motion to go in camera, please.
I'll move that it is in the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of the council and officers be excluded from the meeting to consider confidential matters respecting information that would be prohibited from disclosure under Section 21 of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, pursuant to Section 90.1J of the Community Charter, and that council continue the meeting in closed session.
Second.
We have a moved and seconded. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, staff.